Please note that, although everything I've documented is factual, the case was never actually solved and has likely gone cold, since this happened more than 10 years ago. So back in 2007, I found myself working as a bartender at a now-closed pub in my hometown. Not a job I particularly liked, but it paid the bills. At this time, they hired a new kitchen manager, and his name was Kearney. Kearney was a pleasant enough man, mostly keeping to himself, but always stayed late to help the barman do our closing duties, so we all liked him for that. New in town, Kearney had yet to find a place of permanent residence, and I had recently lost my tenants, so someone suggested that he ask me. He was considerably older than the tenants I usually took in, but having had a streak of bad luck with tenants my own age, I thought an older man with a nice steady job may be a shift in the right direction, so I agreed. Kearney wasted no time, too, and followed me home that very same night. Only, he wasn't alone. Enter Lawrence, the boyfriend of Kearney. Honestly, I hadn't even realized that he was gay up at that point, but it was water off my back regardless. Looking back now, what really should have bothered me, though, was Lawrence's appearance. I don't mean this to sound horrible or anything, but he honestly looked like he'd been sleeping on the street. So Kearney moved in, Lawrence was there a lot too, and it was easy enough to know when due to his mobile ringtone sounding like the quacking of a duckling. Kearney had some habits too that were rather noteworthy to the story. In particular, one, he basically never closed his bedroom door, no matter what he was doing in there. It was always just open. And two, although he was a very heavy smoker, he never once smoked inside of the house. So Kearney had been living there for about 2 weeks, I'd say, when I had come down with an awful case of pink eye. This being highly contagious, I was given leave of absence from my bartending job, and therefore decided to go wait it out at my sister's for a few days. And apparently I didn't mind giving it to her too. Sorry, sis. So the day my sister was scheduled to come pick me up, no, I couldn't drive yet, I took a casual stroll into the bar that myself and Ben, my good friend from high school, and at the time co-worker, had been building in my house, and something caught my eye. All of our liquor bottles were completely empty. Now, those who have been frequenting my house at that time would know that we weren't just talking about 1 or 2 bottles of brandy here too, but bottles of whiskey, gin, vodka, snaps, liqueurs. Basically, it was a fully stocked bar that could host a pretty big party without requiring much in the way of additions. So, I called Kearney in, asking him what he knew about this, receiving feedback that Lawrence and he had been on a slight drinking binge. Those were the actual words that he used. That he had left me both furious about the $1,000 worth of stock that they had drunk out, but also slightly impressed that he was actually still alive. Regardless, though, I said that I'll be dealing with this upon my return. So I'm with my sister for a few days, and on Friday, I get a call from the local police department, asking me if I know a Conrad Schultz. Ironically enough, I didn't, and they finally add that I'll probably know him as Kearney, and that I should probably come down to the station as they had just arrested his boyfriend, trying to sell my camera equipment. So, my sister rushes me back to home, where all my camera equipment was on display at the police station. It's on this visit that I'm informed that Lawrence was actually a Navy SEAL who got dishonorably discharged before turning to a life of crime, and now had a rap sheet the length of the Bible. And the kicker was that both he and Kearney were actually homeless men who had met at the Salvation Army. So, Lawrence is in jail and my sister drops me off at home, more or less the same time that Kearney gets home as well. Based on Kearney's account of what had happened, he had turned Lawrence in himself, as he couldn't allow Lawrence to do to me what he was trying to do. Although I had appreciated his sacrifice, I told Kearney that he would have to go, having been the overall cause of all of this. However, not wanting to leave the homeless man, well, homeless, I gave him until the end of the month to make other arrangements. So, Monday comes, and having just completed staff meetings, I walk home to encounter a very much free Lawrence, sitting on the sidewalk across my house, watching it. I confront Lawrence as to why he's there, and he tries to apologize before begging for money. Rather out of character, really, too, but I dismissed him without giving him a cent. Now, to go back to the previous night, You see, I had mentioned the staff meeting for a reason, as it was at this meeting where he had gotten a rather sizable list of liqueur bottles that had gone missing from the storeroom, leaving us all suspecting each other. But I, however, would not have to wait long to figure out who the real culprit was, as a few days later, I opened the garage bin in my kitchen to see the missing bottles, all empty and staring back straight at me. I decided to sit on this information for the time being, although I did photograph it, just for in case I need it as evidence later. I had also called over Ben to inform him of the other developments. As this was quickly becoming a detective game, we decided to enter Kearney's room to search for further evidence. Nothing of vast significance in there, with one exception. 2 single photographs of Lawrence before he had turned into the homeless version of Lex Luthor or Charles Xavier. Actually, there were several of Lawrence's things still in there, but as Lawrence spent a lot of time in there, before the incident that is, I just accepted this as normal. Now, I should also add that I had mentioned Lawrence's release to Kearney and had told him that if I even suspected that they were still seeing each other, I would throw him out of the house myself. Only a few days would pass before this came into play. On this particular night, I'd been bartending again, and Kearney had constantly been stopping by the bar to help himself to draught glasses, half full of wine and half full of coke, which he would go and drink outside the restaurant. We confronted him about this, but as he correctly pointed out, he was still a manager and we had no right to tell him what he could or could not do. On his 4th trip, however, I had grown suspicious and decided to follow him outside, where I encountered Lawrence sitting outside, sharing the half coke, half wine concoctions with Kearney. And this really ticked me off. So the next day, I returned to the restaurant with my photographic evidence that I handed over to the general manager, who was also kind of a friend of mine, and although I hadn't physically seen it, I had heard the confrontation through the office door when he fired Kearney. And Kearney left, obviously upset, and apparently had no idea that I'd been the one who had turned him in. So we had closed early that night, and I was walking home, going past the high school. I saw Kearney coming from the opposite direction. He just walked past me, literally only saying 2 words, "I'm scared," before just disappearing into the darkness. And that would be the last time that I would ever physically lay my eyes on Conrad Schultz. We reached the final week before Kearney's eviction was to take place. Ben had come to stay with me for that duration, as we both wanted to monitor the situation and make sure that nothing else happens. It was in this week that Kearney's behavior suddenly changed. He was constantly smoking in his room, and his door was closed 24/7. In fact, neither Ben nor I had caught so much as a peek from him in that entire last week, which we hadn't thought much of at that time. So the day of Kearney's eviction comes around, though. Ben had gone home for a few hours, and I had finally heard Kearney's bedroom door open. Someone walks out of the room, opens the front door, and leaves. I follow him outside, but somehow he had already completely disappeared. Well, what was left, though, was his house keys, indicating that he obviously wasn't planning to come back. I took a look at the keys, noticing something strange. Although the correct keys were all on the keychain, there were also several that weren't mine. And why would he leave me the wrong keys? I remember myself thinking as I walked into his room. And his room was a shock, to say the least. Not because of the state that it was in. The 2 had broken his bed in an act of wild monkey stuff, but I had known about that already. As I said, he never closed the damn door. But more that he had literally left almost all of his belongings behind, with one exception. You guessed it too, the 2 photos of Lawrence. Upon further investigation, I suddenly realized too that all traces of Lawrence ever being there had completely vanished, with all of Kearney's stuff left behind. There was one thing of Lawrence's left behind, though, his duckling ringtone, which turned out hadn't been so much as a ringtone as an actual duckling, which now strolled around casually in the vacant bedroom. We named him Neville, by the way. So, Ben returns and gets updated about the developments, both of us thinking the way that he left was rather weird. Of course, the whole thing had been weird, though. It was only when I asked the infamous question that this all became a bit of a conspiracy theory. Did you ever actually see Kearney in this last week? It was to our shock that we realized that neither of us had. And suddenly putting the puzzle pieces together, the changing habits, Neville the Duck, the wrong keys, only Lawrence's stuff being gone, it was to great discomfort that we both asked the question, who had been really living in our house this last week? During the next few days, Ben and I went on a bit of a mission, searching the town, crawling into drain pipes, trying to find any trace of Kearney's whereabouts. But they all added up to nothing. Conrad Schultz had simply vanished off the face of the earth. That wasn't the case with Lawrence, though. No, he was still around, having made some new homeless friends, and we encountered him several times begging on the streets. I asked him every time, "Where's Kearney, Lawrence?" But he just acted like he had never even heard of him. The last time that I would see Lawrence was across from my work, attempting to break into a car. I had called the police on him, and they had arrived rather quickly, arresting him on the spot. And while he was being led away by the police, I shouted after him one more time, "Where is Kearney, Lawrence?" But he just ignored me and let the cops drag him away. The next day I filed a police report, reporting Kearney as a missing person, and suggested that Lawrence may know something about it. But nothing ever really came of it. So my cousin moved back into town a little over a year ago. I'm going to say maybe April or June of 2018. She has 3 kids, and the youngest is a 5-year-old girl. After they had moved into their new place and were finally settled in after a few weeks, I went to visit along with some other family members. We had an overall good time, a lot of good food and whatnot, and after dinner, I remember my little cousin, who was 4 at that time, wanted to play that cootie game. It was in her room upstairs, and she needed someone to go with her because she was afraid of something. I put it up to her being in a new environment and still getting used to the house. So, naturally, as an adult, I prepared to fight off any escaped Monsters, Inc. characters so she could get her game. We got to her room, and she refused to even set foot in it. And I asked something along the lines of, "Is there a bad thing in here?" She nodded and pointed to the game, and I went to grab it. And then she told me to be careful in that corner of her room. I asked why, and she says, "That's where the screaming lady is. She's on fire and screaming a lot. I don't like her." Hearing this makes my heart drop into my gut like a lead anvil. I quickly grabbed the game and we just went downstairs at that point. As soon as we were back in the living room, my cousin returned to her normal, cheery self and we played some cootie. Later on that night, I asked her mother, my first cousin, if she knew about this screaming lady that her daughter told me about. She said that her daughter refused to sleep in her room until they make the lady go away, and has come to sleep in her parents' bed just about every night since they moved in. No one else has had any weird experiences in the house since moving in, but this 4-year-old girl is beyond terrified on a nightly basis. Well, a month or so passes, and I don't really hear much more about any spooky experiences, so I eventually come to the conclusion that my cousin was simply having very specific reoccurring night terrors or something like that. Cut to yesterday evening, though. It was the birthday for another one of my cousin's kids, so I stopped over to bring him the new Fire Emblem game for the Nintendo Switch. I usually stop over a few times a week to hang out, since it's not far from my workplace. So today, being my cousin's birthday, didn't make my stopping over a rare occurrence or anything like that. We ended up playing some of it. We played some Mario Kart and played some Super Smash Bros, and everything just went pretty well. That is, until later on in the evening. We were waiting for a pizza to arrive, and I was in the kitchen grabbing some soda with my cousin, whose birthday it was. When out of nowhere, we both pick up on the very distant smell of burning. My cousin and her husband came out of the living room and the kitchen, thinking that we had cooked and burned something, but obviously we hadn't. And the house just filled up with this smell, and if I were blind, I would have guessed that I was right next to a massive bonfire, minus the heat. During this time, my youngest cousin, now 5, was taking a nap on the couch in the living room. She suddenly starts yelling for her mum, who goes in to check on her. Everyone else follows, and she's inconsolably crying and screaming, saying, "I can hear the screaming lady in my room. I hear her screaming." So basically, everyone had that same lead anvil heart dropping in the gut moment that I had last year. We went up to her room with her mum staying with her, but when we got there, we saw nothing. But the smell of burning had changed from that of a bonfire to only what I can guess a person smells like when they burn. A heavy waft of just burning hair smell, followed by some other burning smell that I honestly hadn't experienced in my entire life thus far. We quickly went back downstairs and told her mother what we had experienced, and she decided for us to all go outside to the front porch or patio area until the pizza arrived. My little cousin was still hysterical, saying that she didn't want to hear the lady screaming anymore. We tried to calm her, and eventually she seemed to settle down a bit. I'm still scared, but not screaming and crying anymore. We continued to sit there for maybe 10 minutes. My two other younger cousins and I were comparing our Pokemon Go collections, and my youngest cousin and her parents were watching some kid-friendly YouTube stuff to distract her. When out of nowhere, everyone hears the most blood-curdling, terrifying and loud scream come from inside of the house's second floor. It must have lasted for maybe 15 or so seconds straight, just multiple long, horrible screams. And after that moment, everything just went dead quiet. My 5-year-old cousin went back to throwing a fit, and everyone else was visibly shaken. I decided that it was time to leave at that point. It was about 9:30 p.m, and while pizza would have been very tempting, I was not hungry in the slightest anymore after that. I thanked them for ordering a pizza, even though I wasn't going to have any, and they wholeheartedly understood. I wished my other cousin a happy birthday and told him not to spoil the new Fire Emblem game for me, and I just went home. I couldn't sleep at all last night, though, and I didn't even turn off my light. I was a tired mess at work today, and I'm still fearful of going to bed tonight. I texted my cousin a few times today, and this evening too, and she said that the burning smell didn't go away until around 4 a.m, and no one slept there last night either, and are looking into getting some kind of help so that they can feel less terrified about their home. I feel terrible for them, honestly, and worse for my young cousin, who has been actually seeing this screaming lady in her bedroom. And I haven't been able to get the smells coming from her room out of my head. I also have been getting hints of them on and off as my day has gone on, and I'm hoping that it's just a residual smell memory and not something more ominous. I still don't think I want to try and sleep tonight, especially not with the light off. It was just such a crazy and scary experience, and I knew that I needed to share it with you guys. I have never experienced something like this in my life, ever. I've had some spooky things happen over the years in the homes that I've lived in, sure, and maybe a few weird things in another family member's home or a friend's place or whatever, but nothing to the point where I've been this terrified. I really hope my cousin and her family can figure out the situation and make their home somewhere that they feel safe again. Do you guys have any advice that I could give them in order to guide them along the correct path in seeking help? This happened when I was probably about 7 or 8. I don't remember all of the details, but I do remember some of the really messed up stuff. So when I was a kid, I lived in a pretty sketchy neighborhood. We lived in those long apartments, the ones that are attached at the sides rather than stacked on top of each other. The front of the apartments faced the main road, and there was a little side street to access the parking in the backyards of the apartments. Behind the apartments was a massive field too, and it was super overgrown, so much so that it was almost like a little forest. And my friends and I used to go back there to build hobbit holes in the grass and whatnot. My mum actually hated it when we went out there because there were some, rough people that lived in the neighborhood, and she didn't like a group of 7-year-olds playing out where people also shot up heroin. But anyway, one day I was out in the woods by myself, just exploring and pretending to be Indiana Jones or something. As I was coming out of the tall grass, I could see the little back alley in between the parking and the houses and the woods, and I saw a deer lying in the grass. I thought that it was just sleeping, so I actually crept up on it to try and scare it. I know, not cool, but I was young and stupid. When I got there, though, I just knew that something was off. The deer was just too still, and it just smelled horrible. I couldn't see its face, as its back was facing me, but when I got up to it, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw that its entire stomach was ripped open, and all of the insides were just spewed out everywhere around the ground. Now, I wasn't a smart kid by any means, but I knew that this was pretty messed up. When I turned to run back home to tell my mum, I saw a second deer nailed to the tree next to the first deer. I don't know how I didn't notice this before, but its two front hooves were nailed above its head to the tree, the stomach was also cut open, and the ribs had been broken open to expose the gaping hole. As I stood there, just staring at it, a car drove past on the little alleyway. I remember it was a white car with tinted windows and was driving really slowly. I mean, everyone drove slowly on this alley because, well, there was a residential street, but these people were barely even moving. I couldn't see inside, but I just got the sinking feeling that they were just watching me. Obviously, I couldn't be sure that they were the ones who mutilated the deer, but I'm like 99% sure that it was them. Once they were gone, I booked it home and I told my mum the whole thing. She told me not to go into that field anymore, and after that, I happily agreed. I didn't particularly enjoy seeing a deer's insides, and I would have loved to have just forgot about that whole thing. For the next month or so, though, I just saw that car pretty much everywhere. It would drive up the main road while I was playing in the front yard. It would drive down the back alley when I'd be in the backyard, and I even remember seeing it at the grocery store when my mum and I were shopping. That could have just been another tinted window white car, but they were definitely stalking the house, I know that much. It was always the white car and always the tinted windows, and always driving way too slowly to be normal. I told my mum about it, but she just chalked it up to just being a neighbour down the road or something. But one day, my mum was out mowing the front lawn. Because of the way the apartments were set up, she had to push the lawnmower around all of the apartments to get to our backyard, and being the helpful little kid that I was going to meet my mum out the back to open the gate for her so she could put the lawnmower in the little shed. As I'm walking out to the gate, I see the car come along the back alley. Normally, the car goes slow, as I've been saying, but as soon as it turned the corner, however, the driver stepped on the gas and zoomed up to me. The back door closest to me opened and someone got out and started running toward me. I don't remember what he looked like, or even if it was a he. I just remember hauling ass back into the house and pissing myself the whole time. After that, my dad yelled at me for peeing myself, and neither he nor my mum believed me about the guy in the car, and I never saw them again after that. And we moved a few months later, too. My parents still think that I made the whole thing up, even though they know how sketchy the neighborhood was. I don't remember anyone going missing around that time in my town, and I didn't find anything when I googled it, but it was really messed up, and I have no idea who those people in the car were, why they mutilated the deer like that, or what they may have had planned for me. I still kick myself for my stupidity during this event. So, this happened during the summer when I was 14, about 16 years ago. My parents had just moved me to this new house that they had built in a rural part of Pennsylvania. It was 2004 and the housing market hadn't crashed yet, so our new house was one of the first in this brand spanking new neighborhood. It was the kind of neighborhood that you drive through and go, yep, these people definitely have money. I hadn't started school yet in my new town, so I had no friends to really hang out with that summer, so I just spent a lot of time just hanging out with my mum, taking drives around our new area and staying up and watching movies and whatnot. One night in early August, though, we had just finished watching something and were getting ready to go to bed. It was one of those summer nights that caused the windows to fog up from the cool air inside. You couldn't see anything out the windows, though, unless you pressed your face to them. As we turned everything in the downstairs off, we saw headlights come down our street. Mind you, it was about 1 a.m., in a brand new neighborhood with about 4 houses in it and maybe 2 more under construction. We didn't have neighbors at this point either, and There was literally no reason for someone to be on the street unless they were A, lost, or B, looking to steal stuff. Well, we hope it's A and keep going about our business to get ready for bedtime. And then we see the reflection of another light outside of our house, and it wasn't car lights. Once again, we can't see out of our fogged window, so me being a curious 14-year-old, I walked right up to the front door and pressed my face to the window, and immediately fell right back to the floor, because as soon as I looked out there was a face staring straight back at me. My mum asked me what was wrong, and I just started stammering. Then my adrenaline kicked in. I ran to the kitchen and opened the knife drawer. I pulled out a butcher knife and walked back to the front door. I'm still shaking from basically being nose to nose with a complete stranger, and my 14-year-old brain thought that this was a great idea. I flung open the front door and wielded the butcher knife, and to my shock and surprise, I see not one, but 3 full-grown men outside. And my dumb ass just ran full speed towards them with a butcher knife over my head. And, luckily for me, they ran. After this, my mother called the police while yelling at me for being such a dumbass, but despite my stupidity in the situation, I've always been slightly proud of 3 grown men being afraid of a tiny 14-year-old girl wielding a butcher's knife. This took place back in 2007. I was 13 years old, and up until then, I hadn't really experienced anything paranormal. I can remember it was a normal summer night, though. I was watching TV, and it was maybe 9 or 10, I think, when I started to hear something, but at first I thought it was just the TV. Then I kept hearing it for the next few minutes, and the more I heard it, the more I realized that it was the faint sound of a baby crying. I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe my sister brought over my nephew or something, and he had a distinct cry when he was younger. So I went out to say hi to them, but there was nobody outside. I kept hearing the cry too, and it sounded like it was coming from the wooded area below our house. I walked maybe 10 or 20 yards into the darkness to see if I could see anything, but nothing. And chills immediately went up my spine, and I ran back into the house. We live out in the middle of nowhere, and the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. And I told my dad about it the next morning, and he said that my granddad experienced the same thing. Years before, he woke up in the middle of the night to hear a baby crying. He went out to the wooded area and tried looking for it. He spent 30 minutes wandering in the dark with a flashlight trying to find it, but nothing. To this day, I still have no idea what it was that I heard, and I refuse to go down to that wooded area, even though we chopped down most of the trees. Around 6 years ago, my buddies and I had a little tradition of sorts during our senior year of high school where we'd stay out all night skating and exploring all kinds of spooky areas. And this was before any of us had a car too, so everything was travelled by foot. Now, one night in particular, we had ventured out over an hour from our usual exploration areas, and we came across a heavily wooded area that we hadn't been through before. The time had to have been around 2 or 3 in the morning, and just looking into those woods gave me an incredible feeling of unease that I'd never felt before. My buddies were determined to go through it though, but I decided against it and instead told my friends that I'd just skate or walk around and meet them at the gas station on the other side. It took me around 30 minutes to skate around the entire area. I waited at the exit of the woods for about 15 minutes before crossing the 4-lane street that led to the gas station, and I asked the clerk if 3 other teens had come in, and he tells me no, so I head back out to wait in the front. 10 more minutes pass before I can hear very heavy footsteps moving quick from behind the gas station's main building. Next thing I know, I see all 3 of my buddies, sweating, out of breath, and looking like they witnessed a murder. We head into the gas station and sit at the small seating area. They then go on to tell me that somewhere halfway into those woods, they heard strange noises behind them, and when they turned around to look, they saw a tall white figure with red eyes staring at them. They said that they freaked out and just took off. As they neared the end of the woods, though, they could hear the leaves and the branches rustling as if it was chasing them. They kept running until they crossed the road separating the woods from the gas station, and once they were at the back of the gas station, they looked back and could see the figure just standing at the edge of the woods, unmoving. The way they described it was that it was only vaguely shaped like a human, more like a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot type creature, but was white in color and had piercing red eyes. Honestly, I had never seen anyone so distressed in the way that my friends were that night. But they genuinely seemed terrified, and that night was the last time that they ever wanted to stay out all night again. I still think about this night a lot, even to this day. So when my parents were in college, they went on a trip down to Florida. They had met through mutual friends and were down there together but hadn't gone on a date yet. My dad and one of his friends were planning to meet my mum and some of her friends at a hotel, but being the carefree college guys that they were, they lost track of time and realized that it was impossible to get to the hotel on time by walking. They decided that the best solution to their problem was just to hitchhike, and a car with two women picked them up. Everything seemed fine too until the driver asked if it was okay to stop for gas. My dad and his friend agreed that it was no problem since they were making good time, and she drove into a gas station. She then pumped a car full of gas before hopping back in and flooring it, basically stealing the gas with two hitchhikers in the back. My dad and his friend were beginning to freak out when she pulled a gun from under a seat and asked, "Are we going to have a problem?" or something like that. My dad and his friend shook their heads vehemently because what else do you do in that situation? And then she drove them to the hotel and dropped them off without so much as a scratch, and they kind of thought nothing of it until the news started reporting on a serial killer in Florida known as Eileen Warners. He took one look at her picture and instantly recognized her as the driver. The only reason my dad thinks that she didn't straight up kill them was because they were super polite and respectful to her, and her victims were usually scumbag guys trying to take advantage of her. Let me start by giving a little bit of background. So I'm 23, 5'2" and female. I'm by no means intimidating, even when I try. I work 2 days of night audit for a hotel in a heavily populated area of Houston, Texas, with zero security. And if you know anything about Houston, you know that it can never be good news. With all that being said, last Tuesday, I was alone playing stupid games online and listening to Ryan's Roses to pass the time. Around 1 a.m., this man with a crazed look in his eyes wanders in. I have cameras right next to the desk, and I saw zero movement before the doors slide open, and anyways, he walks up to the desk and refuses to look me in the eyes until I ask him if he's doing alright. He snaps his head up, looks me right in the eyes and says, "No, I am not alright at all." I'm kind of taken aback by this, so I apologize and ask if there's anything that I can do, etc. He declines and then asks if he can get a drink from the little shop next to the desk. I tell him, yeah, of course. Go ahead and get whatever you'd like. The prices are listed there on the wall. Before he walks away to get his drink, he makes sure to tell me, "Now don't worry, I have money. I would never steal from you like that." I didn't really say anything, just kind of smiled at him and nodded understandingly. And well, he wasn't lying. He for sure had money because he handed me 2 bloody dollar bills. So now, all the alarm bells are definitely ringing in my head. He starts apologizing though and asking if I'm mad at him and if he had upset me, and all of which I said, "No sir, I'm not even a little bit upset. I was getting boring in here anyways." I suddenly though became painfully aware of how empty the entire hotel was at that moment. He stands there for a minute, takes a drink, and then makes eye contact for 2 seconds before he tells me that he needs me to call the cops. I start shaking, but somehow manage to not let off that I was absolutely terrified. I get the police dispatcher on the line and begin giving all of the information and our location. Then, from the background, he starts saying that he was almost hit by a car while walking in the middle of the road. The dispatch then asks to speak to him, so I hand the guy the phone and he starts looking around while describing himself. He then stops looking around and looks right into my eyes and says, "Yeah, I'm going to end myself on the freeway." Now, I don't take that lightly, no matter who says it. An audible gasp left my lips, and it was like it woke something up in him because his eyes just lit up. He then hangs up the phone and slams it down on the counter in front of my computer and just looks at me. I try to make small talk, asking what's going on and how he's really doing tonight, but nothing. He just avoids those questions and starts asking some questions about the hotel, like, "What is your nightly rate tonight?" He then goes from harmless questions to asking if I'm alone and when my manager will be back and if I lock all the doors around me. And now I'm definitely afraid. I pick up what he's putting down, and I want no part in whatever he was planning if he managed to get me out from behind the desk. I switch gears on conversation and tell him that he is more than welcome to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs in the lobby until the police arrive. He then thanks me and asks me again for the 20th time if I'm mad at him. When he sits down, I get even more uneasy though because he starts looking around anxiously. You know that look someone gets whenever they're working up the nerve to do something, but they just haven't yet? Yeah, that's the look and the vibe that he was giving off at that moment. Around that time, my brain finally pieces together what is actually happening because another guest pulls up right in front of the lobby, and his face immediately drops any excitement, and in fact he almost looks mad. In comes this woman and her son who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. They came up, no reservations, so it was now a walk-in, which takes a little longer since I have to put in all of her information instead of just checking in and moving along to the next. And her son starts whispering something to her that neither of us can make out. So he says it louder, and then he says, "Mum, didn't we just see him walking around at the hospital?" My blood runs cold, and she tells her son to hush, and locks eyes with me, and I hand her paperwork to sign. She takes that opportunity to secretly ask me if I'm okay, if the police need to be called, and if I'm concerned. I tell her that yes, I'm terrified, and the cops are on their way. I can see him straining to hear what we're saying, so I stop and tell her about breakfast and all that good stuff, and she tells me that she'll not be leaving me alone, that she'll stay with me until the cops come because something just doesn't feel right. And God bless this woman. I'll never forget her face and her heart. After the cops had come and taken him away, mental hospital I presume, she comes back in from just outside the doors where she also called the police. She comes up and tells me that they'd just left the hospital up the road visiting her sister and passed him on their way out, where he was wandering around the hospital parking lot with his head down. They came straight to the hotel, but he had beat them here, and he swore that he walked here, but there's just no way that he walked here and beat them. She said that she felt like something was off as soon as she walked in and saw him. She told me that he was likely trying to lure me out from behind the desk, making me feel bad for him, but whatever he was planning, I never want to find out. So let me first preface this with a note. This isn't being shared to be analysed or to have someone pop up and say it was demons or ghosts or otherwise. I do strongly suspect that it was ghosts, but being a skeptic in such things, I can't say 100% sure that that's exactly accurate. It may have been just my child mind interpreting things oddly. Who knows? Also, the location that I describe does not exist anymore, having been destroyed in a highway widening project sometime between 1990 and 2000. So, when I was rather young, in second grade in fact, my family lived in the country, out in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi. There were no children for me to play with, and I tended to get a bit more lonely than you'd expect. But when we were in the process of moving out there, parents had this double-wide trailer. There was one incident that took many years to be certain that I hadn't imagined it. But while on one of the expeditions to the plot where my family was going to put the trailer, my mother needed to make a stop to use the restroom. With no gas stations for a good 10 miles, Dad pulled the truck down this dirt road looking for a place to stop. And there, maybe 200 to 300 yards from the two-lane road, we found what looked like to be an abandoned gymnasium from a school. Dad decided to use that place as the bathroom, and we headed in. I don't really recall much about the building, though one thing always stuck out in my mind. Near the doors where we entered through was this rather massive pile, or massive in my child mind anyway, of clothing. I remember too, after doing his business, that my father stood at the front of it, looking up at the clothing, and he seemed to be thinking of something, but he never said anything about it. Several weeks later, with the trailer in place, we moved out there and the gym was largely forgotten by me. However, that didn't stop weird things from happening. Well, not weird in the sense of stuff moving around or anything of that sort, but just weird sounds. Within a month or so of living there, I was playing on the front porch when I heard laughter. Now, before I go further though, let me clarify as to where we lived then. The trailer was a good 100 feet back from a dirt road, and across the road was the home of an elderly gentleman that I'll call O. Behind his house was a rather extensive stand of pine trees that reached down to the two-lane highway, probably a distance of 500 to 600 feet total between where I was and the highway. But in any case, as I sat on the front porch my father had built, playing with some of my toys, I just kept hearing laughter. Not one child's laughter either, but several. It sounded to my ears like 5 or 6 kids were playing somewhere, if I had to guess, off behind where I lived. Not having anyone to play with too, I remember wondering where these kids were, and if they'd play with me. Walking up the road, I could tell that the kids seemed to be playing in the woods, as their laughter came and went, and after a moment I called out to them that I wanted to play too. And as soon as I said that, the laughter just cut off. It was just dead silence. But one moment there was laughing and fun, and the next it was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. I decided that I'd just scared the kids off, and I just went back inside at this point. This happened several times too, and eventually I just gave up. I'd hear the kids laughing and playing, but they never seemed to get closer, and after a couple of times of this, I remember telling my mother, and she got this really odd look on her face before telling me that she didn't want me playing out front any longer. We lived there for another year or two before we moved, and I largely forgot about the experience, if I'm being honest. It wasn't until many years later when the story came up again in conversation with my parents. That's when I found some of the story out too, and personal investigation told me the rest. So my mother said that the reason she reacted that way was because she'd heard a rumor that the area that we moved to was actually haunted. She didn't have all the details, but felt that it was tied to the old gym, and all she could say, or would say, was the quote, something bad had happened and she was afraid. After my parents passed away, I kind of forgot the story again, and it always stuck in the back of my head as just something weird, but that was it. Eventually, though, one bored night, I happened to stumble across the website for the church that we had attended. On a lark, I shot an email off to the pastor asking if there had been a gym near where I remembered. I didn't expect to hear back. But 2 months later, I checked my email to find that yes, he'd actually replied. And here is what he related to me. There had been a gym that once stood near where I described, though it had long since been torn down. The gym had been a part of a private school which had stood there from roughly 1900 to about 1979 or 80. And in the early spring of that year, a tornado had gone through and demolished most of the wing of the school, and in doing so, killing a number of students. The building had collapsed, burying the students under the rubble, resulting in the death of a number of them, and I think between 10 and 15 students or something. And after this, it was decided to close the school. As they were demolishing it too, they cleaned out clothing from lockers and various places, dumping it in the gym in the tall pile that I remember seeing. The gym had been left standing because it was hoped that one of the local churches might use it, but given what had happened there, well, it just ended up being left abandoned. Curiously though, the property behind O's house had also been a part of the school's property at one time, being used by the students as a kind of playground area. This did explain why O kept digging up old toys, mostly metal trucks and such, which he gave to me. Looking back though, I've come to the conclusion that what I had been hearing was in some way tied to the old school and the loss of life there. Though I also wonder if in some way it was just my childhood imagination running wild or something like that. That's probably one of the problems that I have with this story too. For all I know, my parents could have mentioned what happened at the school at some point and I just overheard it. And in my lonely state, my mind and imagination may have just run wild. Whatever the case though, I thought that you'd find the story interesting, to say the least. So I was working the evening shift at a gas station, and a man comes in all disorientated. I go to help him out, and he has a huge gash on his head and doesn't know where he is. I couldn't see any crashes around, so assumed that he must have fallen or something. Normally we're supposed to stay inside the glass-shielded register area whenever anyone is in the store, but I, being a nice human being, went to help by calling the police and EMS. They got there and checked him out, and they thought that his head may have been fractured. They took him into the ER, and I just went back to work. The cops stopped back by for some coffee a few hours later, and they told me that the guy had actually been hit by a baseball bat while trying to break into a little girl's bedroom and was wanted for rape and murder in 2 other states. And well, I never left the register area at night again. So last night, from Wednesday to Thursday, I was home alone because, well, my girlfriend sleeps at her home every Wednesday. And because she doesn't like smoking, I usually smoke on Wednesday nights and Thursday mornings when she isn't with me. I wait for the night so I can go to the garden of my grandma and just smoke without being seen. It's the kind of garden where about 14 people have their own area. I hope you get what I'm talking about. The garden of my grandma is one of the least, completely in the back. Usually when I'm there at night, I just get a chair and watch the night while smoking. Nothing's ever happened before, but last week there was a birthday party of some younger people who may have seen me, but they weren't really paying attention to me, and their party was in the front of this garden area anyway. But last night was very different. So I got my smokes out at home and got my dog and headed to the garden at about 12:30 a.m. Nothing ever really happened there, and I was just looking forward to just kind of relaxing and looking up at the sky and whatnot, and as I arrived there, something was just off. It was the first time that I'd ever been there, and the door wasn't locked. Even last week's party people locked the door while being inside. And well, I snuck in and looked around, seeing if there were any lights on or something. But there was nothing. So in the end, I just thought that maybe the last person just forgot to lock it or something. I walked down the path to my grandma's garden. I bound my dog on a chain about 2 meters in front of me, and I'm just sitting there on a chair facing the path so I would see if someone was coming. Right behind me too, there were some thick bushes and a fence. Behind the fence is about another meter thick bush and tree layer, so you'd have a pretty hard time seeing in from the outside. And well, I made myself comfortable and I began to smoke. Sadly, it was a cloudy day and I couldn't really see any stars. But at some point, I recognized something just out of the corner of my eye. Something was standing behind me, about 1.5 meters high and about 3 meters away to my right. Obviously scared, I just kind of froze and just watched. And as I focused, I noticed that it was a black outline of a little chubby person. His head was sneaking out from the left side of the tree, and then it hid again. The tree is right next to the way to get out of the garden, and on the left side of the tree is my grandma's garden house. It's not that big, but there are 2 windows without glass where you can look inside and outside. And just a few moments later, me still staring back at this dude to my right, I started to see movement to my left coming from the garden next to ours. There's a fence between the garden areas, but I could still see something. And there was another guy, fully black, a humanoid figure, just a little more athletic looking than the other one, sneaking on his tippy toes, walking straight towards me. They were still about 3 to 4 meters away, and my dog must have sensed the person to the left as she was staring right at the person walking towards me. At some point she tried to run away, but the leash didn't let her escape, so she just hid her body behind the corner while peeking her head around. And now this person is just standing there, observing both of us. I turned my head to the left and to the right to see if there was anybody else, but There was no one else, and the person was just standing there, watching me. I panicked and I started thinking, did I just come straight into a trap of some robbers or something, or are they going to attack me? I get myself ready to seem confident and strong, ready to fight if some of them were going to get any closer, when I heard someone walking towards the fence from the outside. As I turned my head to see what was making the noise behind me, I started to see what was going on. I had just been encircled by some sort of void black persons, all watching me from around 2 to 3 meters distance. Someone was standing outside on the other side of the fence, someone to my left and also to my right, diagonally. In every direction someone was watching me, and then I noticed that there were more, and some of them were trying to hide behind bushes, some just standing in plain sight. I tried to shout, "You know I can see you, what do you want?" But I just wasn't as loud as I wanted to be, and for some reason I just felt weak. There was no reaction from any of them either. Some were moving a bit, even trying to hide better behind their covers, but none of them really were good in hiding. There must have been about 8 of them, and I tried to stay calm and just keep sitting in my chair, my dog in front of me just sitting there staring at the second guy, when another person appeared behind the guy from the tree, laid on the floor and slowly crawled on the floor further to my right. His crawling looked just ridiculous too, and I made a hand gesture to the other people like, "Are you kidding me?" I mean, his crawling was neither stealthy or necessary. And well, I'm sitting there now for about 15 to 20 minutes frozen, just staring back at them. The first person that just appeared just started walking towards me. Me still thinking real humans were behind this whole scenario, I had to rethink. As it was coming closer to me, the black color of his body, though, just vanished, and it was like a 2D transparent humanoid-like figure. And when I really tried to see them, I could only see the outlines, and even though the person was transparent when looking through the body, it was like looking through fluid or something. I couldn't really see it anymore, just see that it must have stood right in front of me. Every other person still just kept their position. Me just questioning my own sanity. I just ran to my dog and I brought her to my chair. Still being watched by all these figures, I now could also see that someone was standing in the garden house peeking through the window. And I took some deep breaths as I was trying to understand the situation in which I just got myself into. When out of nowhere, something, its body looked kind of like something out of Star Wars, was walking the garden path. It came from the left, the end of the garden, to the right, the garden area entrance, and just before it was going to walk behind the house, it turned itself towards me. It looked like it was holding a laser pointer in its hand or something, sending out orange light but bigger than a centimeter, pointing straight in my face. But it didn't really blind me, and suddenly, and I can tell you that this was definitely the most scary part, 3 red glowing lights appeared from the head of this thing, and it kind of looked like a helmet. I can tell you that I honestly thought that I was about to be shot at this moment, but to my surprise, nothing happened. Just silence again, and everything just observing me. I really tried to see this thing that was giving off this red light, but it was like the red light was pointing towards me, not letting me see its characteristics. Another 15 minutes went by, me thinking how could I get out of this situation, and my dog already shaking. What's weird too is that my dog usually barks at everyone and everything unknown, but this whole time there was not even one sound. At some point, eventually, I just take my bag and my dog and, walking in a little faster speed than regular, I just walked straight out of the garden. As I was standing up from the chair, the red light disappeared and the person behind the tree to my right just ran away. As I was leaving the garden, I looked around to see if someone was nearby as I headed to the entrance of the garden area, but there was nothing. And gladly, nothing was following me, and eventually, I got home safe. This happened in summer of 2018. I had just finalised a divorce and moved back to my hometown. My parents let me stay at their place until I found my own, and I had just started a high-paying job, but I was in so much debt from the divorce that I wasn't ready to pay for a place of my own. I didn't want to mooch off my parents, so I decided to find a roommate for the interim. I found a sweet woman, Raquel, about 15 years older than me, who wanted someone to move in for only 3 to 4 months with her, and this was perfect for me since I was still paying off my debt. Everything about Raquel was such a delight too. She was sweet, very clean, cared about the environment, volunteered, and would actually cook me food just because. I honestly thought that I had hit the jackpot with her. However, there were a few things about Raquel that were just a little bit off. One, she wouldn't tell me what she did for a living. She said that it was confidential. And whatever her job is, it caused her to be gone for days and sometimes weeks at a time even. I thought that maybe she worked for the government because she had a framed photo of her with Bush Jr. in the Oval Office. When I asked her about it, she said that was my last day before leaving the Secret Service. Even though this was odd, I must admit that I was very impressed. But she also had a very strict rule. Every door in the house, including my room, had to be open at all times if it wasn't being occupied. However, this rule didn't apply to her room. Her door was to remain closed at all times, whether she was there or not, and obviously, I was never allowed to go in, which was strange, but not too concerning, right? And she also claimed to be wicked. I don't know much about the practice, but she was apparently really into it. She was constantly going to a nearby store and buying all the books and garnishes and whatnot. But besides these few things, she was a very normal person. And a month went by without any concern. But I should quickly mention too that she had 2 cats. They would mostly stay in her room, but when they wanted out, they would hit the door with their paws. My room was right next to hers, so the sound would drive me crazy. If she wasn't home and I heard the cats trying to get out, I would often open her door just enough so that they could run out. I know that this was breaking the rules, but it drove me crazy and I kind of felt sorry for them too. But everything got too weird one night when she was out of town for work. It was the first night of her being gone, and I was sitting in my room just watching TV when I started to hear what sounded like the cats hitting the door trying to get out. I thought, great, she forgot to let the cats out before leaving again. I opened my door to go and let them out of her room when something made me stop dead in my tracks. The cats were just chilling in the hallway. They weren't in the room, but I know that I heard something. Already creeped out, I decided to open her door and peek inside. And what I saw were 4 people, naked, holding hands in a circle, with their heads bowed as if they were praying. And well, needless to say, I noped the heck out of there and headed to my parents. I tried calling Raquel, but I just couldn't get a hold of her. And right when I was about to call the police, she finally called. And man, she was livid. She said that I'd broken her only rule and she wanted me out immediately, which was fine by me at this point. But the eerie part was when I got my bed and dresser back, there was a weird symbol carved in the wood that wasn't there before. But the only way I can describe it is like a plus sign, but instead of straight lines, they were kind of curved. Like if someone cut an oval in half down the middle and then tried to make a plus sign out of it. I'm really not sure what it was supposed to mean, but to be honest, I don't think that I want to know. This happened quite a few years back when I was around 14 years old. Let me just preface this too by saying that I had previously been told by my old best friend, Jenna, that her neighbour had some really creepy tendencies. I slept over at her place a lot, but never encountered a creepy neighbour. This guy was married and had children apparently, and his house was directly behind Jenna's place. There was a wooden fence in her backyard too that separated the neighbour's backyard and theirs, and Jenna had a deck and the stairs were a few feet off from the house, so you could fit a fairly small person in between the deck stairs and the house. You could also see into the neighbour's backyard if you were standing on the deck, but not if you were on the grass. So, with that understood, we had half a day at school and I went back to Jenna's place. I wasn't allowed over that day, but since we were inseparable, it really didn't matter, and we weren't expecting her mum to be home from work for a good few hours anyway. Her mum ended up coming home early, so Jenna and I scrambled to the backyard so her mum wouldn't see me, so as not to get in trouble. We went outside and wedged ourselves in between the stairs and the house so her mum wouldn't hear the fence gate open, as it made a lot of noise whenever it was opened. We waited for a couple of minutes until we started hearing shuffling in her neighbour's backyard. We could faintly see him through the cracks of the wood, and it looked like he was putting out his recycling or garbage or something. Instead, he was making his way onto the bin and poking his head over the fence to look into their windows. From the backyard, you could see into Jenna's mum's window, the bathroom too, and parts of the kitchen. And we saw him, but he didn't see us. But we were shaking and holding onto each other for dear life as we watched our neighbour just stand upright on the bin to get a better view into the windows. He kept shifting from bin to get better angles into what we assumed later was Jenna's mum's room, since she just got back from work and possibly into the bathroom. This went on for 5 to 10 minutes as well, us trembling and trying not to make a move or make noise while her creepy neighbour just kept trying to look into Jenna's house. He eventually got back down and went into a house like nothing had happened, while Jenna and I hopped a fence gate soon after. A few weeks later, we had another incident too, where Jenna's sister took a shower late at night and went to her room. Her blinds were open and it was dark outside. There was a tree that sat in the front yard and it was snowing pretty heavily. She called us on her phone saying that she apparently saw someone in the trees and couldn't see them anymore. We told her to turn her light off while Jenna and I did the same in her room, and we peeked out the window but couldn't see anything. We went to her sister's room though and asked what happened, and she was convinced that she saw someone in the tree who she believed was their neighbour. And so Jenna and I went out front to investigate. By that time, he was obviously gone, but we did find fresh shoe prints in the snow that went from the neighbour's front yard to the tree, and right up to Jenna's sister's window before it trailed off back to the neighbour's house. Technically, this isn't my story, it's my mum's, but I'm slightly involved, so I'd like to share it. This happened when I was around 3 or possibly 4, since it was in the summer. My parents and I had just moved into a new house in a safer neighbourhood in order to raise me. And basically, they were looking for new 60s themed furniture for our house, so my mother took to Craigslist to try and find some. She eventually reached out to a man selling an older couch. She had just taken me out of preschool before going to his house, so I was in the car with her. My mother is generally a very intelligent woman, although I'll admit being a first-time mother, this wasn't the best idea. But she had left me in the car because she didn't think it would take so long. He was standing outside of the house and, according to her, seemed like a completely average man, probably in his late 40s. He claimed the couch was in the basement and that they would have to go down there. Apparently, the couch was completely different than the one placed in the ad, so she turned around to ask him about it. And he was sweating out of his mind and apparently just started asking her a bunch of really creepy questions along the lines of, "Are you a virgin? How old are you? And are you married?" My mother left pretty quickly after that and claims that he even chased after her down the driveway. She drove off as quickly as possible and to this day says that she thought that he was going to hit her over the head or something and sell her or something along those lines. This happened on a beach in the Philippines about 2 years ago. Me and my friends decided to take a quick vacation to let off some steam from work, and on our first night, we decided to drink outside of the hotel room. We got a little tipsy, and one of my friends decided to take a walk on the beach and try to meet some other tourists there. I had a bit of a bad feeling about what might happen to him since he was already drunk, so I decided to join him together and with another friend. He said that he wanted to visit the rock formations, which is a known gay hookup spot since the place was dark and there were no other establishments on that part of the shoreline. It stretches about half the length of a football field with just pure darkness. I was reluctant about the idea of him going in there. I must admit that I was reluctant about the idea of him going in there, but he was adamant, so I agreed as long as he comes back after a few minutes. Me and my other friends waited on the last bar on the end of the shoreline before the dark area starts. Me and my friend were talking about something when we just heard a gut-wrenching scream. It sounded like our friend, so we decided to rush in. The only light at that time is coming from the moon, so my friend decided to pull out his phone and turn on the flashlight. We asked around and saw some people hooking up on the sand. We asked if they saw our friend, giving them descriptions on what he might look like, but they said that they never saw him. Our hearts were pounding at this point because we don't know what might have happened to him. We ran until we reached the end of it. There was a huge rock on the shore about 15 feet tall with a local guy standing on the top of it. We asked him, "Have you seen our friend?" He was about my height, wearing a black shirt, and he said, "Was he gay?" I don't see the relevance of the question, but I said yes, and he said he might have gone over to the mangroves over there, and then pointed to a darker spot of the beach filled with mangroves. Using only the light on the phone, we tried searching the small area. It looks like a tiny shelter with overgrown plants acting as the roof. And when we turned back, the guy on the top of the rock is already walking towards us, and then 2 more guys popped up behind him, probably hiding behind the huge rock as well. And then the guy who was on the rock did a karate chop on my friend's arm for him to let go of his phone, which was successful. As the phone rolled onto the sand, my friend was able to grab the phone back, and that's when he shouted, "Run." I was confused with what was going on, so I just started running after he said run without actually knowing what we were running from. And that was when it hit me that the whole thing was an ambush, that we were led into the mangroves for them to steal my friend's phone. I was running for a few seconds when I started feeling the weight on my feet. The sandals that I was wearing got really heavy because I wasn't aware that I was running on wet sand. My friend took off his flip-flops for him to run faster. I wanted to do the same, but then I realized my sandals were strap-on, so I just continued running. I can hear the guys chasing us saying, "Stop, we're just joking." I don't want to fall for what they said, so I continued running, and my legs are starting to feel numb since I'm not really an athletic person. And there came a point where I wanted to just stop since I don't have anything valuable with me, but then I thought that that could be a reason for them to harm me, so I just ran with all my might until we reached the first bar eventually. My friend was already there catching his breath when we saw the friend that we were looking for, laughing and talking to locals. We wanted to punch him for what he put us through, but he had no idea what had just happened, so we just let it go. Our vacation still went through, and we still got to go to the island from time to time, but we vowed to never go on that side of the beach, ever again. In my old house, we not only had modern air conditioning vents, but we also had the original ones from 1922. The design was quite elaborate, though unfortunately I don't have any pictures of it. But anyways, one cool September day in 2015, I was sitting on the ground playing with my little brother, who had just turned 1. We were in the hallway at the bottom of the staircase where one of the original air vents were. We were sitting right next to it. I was playing peekaboo with him. He was laughing and smiling and really happy, just having a grand old time basically, playing with his awesome big sister. When I noticed a quiet hissing sound coming from the vent. It kind of sounded like Parseltongue from Harry Potter, if I'm being honest, but I just thought that there was something wrong with the heater or something, and I paid no mind to it. About 5 minutes after I had noticed the sound, it just suddenly stopped. I couldn't hear anything coming from it anymore, and the moment that I acknowledged that fact, my brother suddenly jumped, startled, and whipped his head around to face the vent. He had the look of just absolute fear on his face, right before he just started shrieking and crying. I mean, it honestly sounded like someone had hit this kid, he was crying so hard. Because of the way Landon was crying, my stepmom ran in from the kitchen. She looked as worried as I'd ever seen her, and she said, "Oh my goodness, what happened? Why is he crying like that? Did he hurt himself?" I explained to her what happened. Talking to Landon, who is still wailing with fear, she says, "It's okay." And then she says to me, "What do you mean he just looked at the air vent and started crying?" I said, I don't know what he heard, but obviously whatever it was terrified him." She looked at me with honest confusion. She picked up my brother, still coddling him and swaying him as he cried and walking him outside, and he was fine after a minute or two, but he would never go near that vent without someone with him. Even in 2017, after he turned 3, he would still ask for people to walk with him past that vent. I never heard anything from that specific vent, though I did hear the same hissing throughout the house when I was home alone or with one of my siblings. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little short story, and thanks for listening. I'm a 30-year-old male and have dealt with strange encounters all my life, ranging from a basic kidnapping attempt to a haunting or demonic presence that felt like it would bring down an entire house on top of me. My wife and friends have always called me things like a magnet for trouble or a lightning rod for the weird, which is fair, seeing as these kinds of people and situations do seem to be drawn to me, and those who are close to me as well. I usually just listen to stories on YouTube, but I was goaded by my best friend into contributing some of my own experiences. And so I decided to start with one of my personal favorites. So around the ages of 18 and 19, I like to go camping and hiking every so often. And living in the northwestern US, it did nothing to put me off from doing so. In fact, I kind of found the cold and damp and dreariness calming in a weird sort of way. Spending a decent amount of time outdoors, I would occasionally meet like-minded individuals, some of them Native American too. I grew up somewhat close with a small group of Native guys around my age, possibly 3 or 4 years older, and after running into them a few times, they took notice of how I was respectful of my surroundings, or at least that I was not an entitled glamper. I guess this gave them enough reason to invite me to join them on one of their outings over the weekend. Let's call them Wolf, Hawk, Bear, and Ted to make things a bit easier. So I met up with them at the edge of the forest before sunrise. We all shared the preference of getting an early start, as well as getting as far from civilization as we could, within reason obviously. We hiked between 30 to 60 minutes before we found a decently wide, flat area and set up camp. The remainder of the day was spent drinking lightly, sharing past experiences, identifying bird calls, and me listening to some of their cultural stories and legends. It was well after sunset, though, that the event occurred. So Wolf got up to answer the call of nature and wandered off through the trees. After he was out of sight, I decided that I might as well take care of my own burden, having hoped that I could wait till morning. Up until then, I made sure to let the rest of them know that I was going number 2, so they wouldn't worry if I was gone for longer than our other companion. I ventured out further than I would have had to have had I needed to leak, not wanting one of them to stumble upon me while in the middle of my business. I just done my belt up and turned to return to our campsite when I thought that I heard something in the distance. I frowned, tilted my head, and strained my ears to see if I could catch whatever it was again. "Help!" someone cried out. It was soft, so I couldn't really tell exactly which direction it was coming from, but it sounded like a male's voice. "Hello?" I called back, eager to lend a hand to anyone who was lost or possibly injured. "Help!" the voice repeated, a little closer now. I took a few steps in the direction that I thought the voice might be coming from, sweeping my flashlight around the area. "Are you lost?" I shouted into the darkness. "Lost?" came the reply, even closer than before. I found it a little strange that they responded with one word, but maybe I'd missed the rest, or maybe they didn't know English very well. Either way, that was enough for me to take a few more quick, determined steps towards the voice, but I was stopped dead in my tracks by the next thing that I heard. It said, "I'm lost," in a really shrieking voice, drawing out the word in what sounded like a human yelling mixed with the high-pitched scream of a deer or some sort of elk. I felt goosebumps raise wherever they could as I muttered to myself, what the hell was that? I took a couple of more slow steps, my flashlight darting from place to place until I heard twigs and brush being disturbed from the direction of our campsite. I whipped around while drawing my hunting knife to be met by the sight of Wolf wearing a stern but concerned expression. I relaxed and sighed in relief before trying to explain about the voice that I heard and how we should go out and see who or what is out there. He just grabbed my upper arm and stoically began dragging me back through the trees. I didn't resist, but I kept trying to make a case for at least attempting to rescue the person out in the woods. His response, though, was chilling. "Yeah, I heard them too. That ain't no person out there, man," he mumbled. I was too dumbstruck to say anything else until we got back to the rest of our group. Once within sight, they began clapping and hooting a little, raising their cans of beer as they shared a laugh. "Wendigo almost got the white boy, did he?" Bear asked. Wolf responded by shaking his head. His eyes widened as he exhaled with his cheeks slightly puffed up in a "that was too close" kind of way. At this point, I'm sure it was one of their friends just helping them play a prank on me, so I called them out on it. They laughed a little more and Hawk said, "Look around, man, we're all here." It was true that the four of them weren't really social with many others, but I was convinced that wasn't proof enough. But what happened next was... We had been talking about this for nearly half an hour, I'd say, before they just all froze, then sprung into action, dismantling and packing up camp faster than I'd ever seen, almost as if it were a sport and they were its star athletes. I tried asking what the hell was going on, but all I got was Hawk hissing, "Listen," not even slowing down in what he was doing. I stood still and tried to tune out all the rustling, thumping and clanking as best as I could. Eventually, my ears picked up on something though. It was a kind of deep chittering or clicking, similar to the sound the Predator makes, coming from the same direction that I'd gone to use the facilities. I was only standing there for a few seconds before I was snapped out of it by Bear, handing me a length of rope with a D-link on the end. "Hook it onto your belt. Can't afford to get separated," he said, his eyes focused on the brush past me. I took it and did as he said, following them to the side camp closest to the way back to our cars before they threw a couple of buckets of dirt over the fire. As soon as it was smothered, Wolf said that we needed to get out of the forest as fast as possible. We didn't run, being hooked together and all, but we walked quickly and half-jogged the whole way, turning what had been about a 45-minute journey before into a 20-minute one. The mood seemed to lighten up immediately after we emerged from the forest, the rest of them laughing and catching their breath as if we had just come out of the other end of a perilous ordeal, me still feeling a little bit lost about what just happened. We set up camp again on the grass near our cars, no fire this time, just lanterns. Once we were all settled, I asked Wolf if they really thought Wendigos were real, and if there had actually been one out there hunting me. They all went quiet as he explained. "Well, you see, the truth is that we don't know exactly what it is," he said with a shrug. "All we know is that they use the voices of people or animals to lure their prey, and then," he clapped his hands, "they ambush it." I felt a bit queasy, wondering how close I'd been to being attacked. A new thought came to mind. I get that it calls for help if it knows people are around, but what was that noise before we packed up? He looked back at me grimly. "That's how they communicate with each other, man." I shuddered, further disturbed by the thought of more than one of those things stalking me. We spent the rest of the evening trying to recover what little good vibes were still to be had that weekend, talking about how we would circle around to a far part of the woods to ensure a good distance between us and those things. Unfortunately, our spirits were severely dampened by yet another cry from the woods. "Why won't you help me?" it screamed, jarring us all out of our mirth and forcing us all to lock eyes on the tree line. "Huh, they followed you all the way here, man," Bear quipped before turning to look at me. "I guess they have a taste for white meat, huh?" he said with a grin. "Don't worry," Wolf said quietly, gesturing to our surroundings. "There's no cover here. They won't leave the forest." My eyes didn't leave the trees, though. "You sure?" I asked. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Wolf nod his head to the side slightly. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure," he replied, a hint of doubt in his voice. And needless to say, I slept in my car that night. This happened the week before I went into my freshman year, so it was just a few years ago. I'm 18 now. So back when I was younger, I liked to sleep in the living room on the couch for some dumb reason. But next to the living room was our game room, and my brother tended to sleep on the couch too. This night also happened to be a night when we didn't turn on the alarm, since our roommate came in and out so often during the night, and our big German Shepherd was sleeping in my mum's room. It was pretty normal when everyone went to sleep, until about 3 a.m. when I woke up to someone's hands wrapping around my throat. I couldn't see anything when I opened my eyes. Turns out he'd taken one of my newly cleaned towels and threw it over my face, and I couldn't really process what was going on. It's really hard to explain unless you've actually experienced it, but it was like I completely forgot that I could even speak as I flailed around trying to slip out of his grip. Even though my brother was sleeping mere feet away from me, the towel muffled my screaming. When I remembered that I could speak, I kind of reflexively just said, "I'm sorry," but soon after I spoke, he let go and just ran out of the back door. After he left, I fell to the floor and just screamed until the rest of my family got up. I was confused because no one else was up. Like, he just left, even though no one could have caught him. I had no idea why he just up and left like that. He didn't even touch anything else in the house, in fact. But once the police showed up, they barely even believed us, since my brother couldn't even recall if he'd locked the door or not. It didn't help, too, that I lived in a pretty bad neighborhood and someone had even broken into our car just the week prior. We never really thought someone would break into our house, though, so we just weren't exactly on top of keeping our alarm on, but the back door that was opened happened to be the one that wasn't hooked up to the alarm anyway, which really made us think that it was someone that had been in the house before, since they would have known that the door wasn't secured. That door was kind of always just broken, so we kept a couch pushed up against it, and we didn't use it to go in and out after this. I don't really know where my roommate was, though. We didn't always talk, and she was always in and out of God knows where anyway, probably at bars or sleeping at other people's houses. And yeah, we weren't very cautious of danger back then, but we certainly are these days. We always turn on our alarm now when we leave the house, and at night too, and we have every door and window set up for the alarm as well. Plus, I've moved to a much better neighborhood now and haven't experienced any shady people around. So, here's hoping this doesn't happen again. I'm Native American Indian, and I have strong beliefs in the Creator and our medicine, which can also be used for ill intentions. When I was young, my grandmother had told me a story about how our family had bad medicine thrown on us, as someone cursed the males in our family. I didn't think back on this until more recent events, but looking back in retrospective, the males in my bloodline have either taken their lives, gotten murdered, or have extreme health problems. For example, my dad was killed when I was 11, my uncle when I was 23, and my grandpa when I was about 20. This could be coincidence, I know, but let me explain. I have one uncle left out of our family, and he has kidney failure. When my grandma was helping him move, she found a bag of black stuff on the top of the fridge hidden in the back. She immediately disposed of it, and my uncle has been taunted quite a bit. Now, I've had a lot of experiences, but I'd like to share these particular incidences. So I live on the top suite of an apartment. This is unusual, but my partner and I were in bed when we heard our screen door slam shut. I was so sure that someone was in our apartment that I went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, but nobody was there. Shortly after that, I woke up from a dream and I had this big long scratch on the side of my body. It was deep and a bit bloody. I even have a picture of it. And it was strange, but I smudged with my medicine, sage, cedar, and sweetgrass, and I felt a lot better after that. Now, fast forward a month or so, my partner and I are in the living room and heard this loud grunt by the screen door. She literally jumped up and we were like, what the hell was that? And about 2 nights after we'd heard that, she got a pounding headache. It was so bad, in fact, that I called the emergency line and the ambulance came. Except, these workers gave me a weird vibe as soon as they stepped into our home. He had no hair and his eyes were like huge headlights. He asked my partner some questions, like, is anything off lately? What's really going on? And I was thinking, what the hell is wrong with this guy? His vibe just really creeped us out. I wanted to tell him to leave, but I knew she wasn't feeling good. I was hoping to get some sort of help, but he eventually left, but not before he said, I'm from the motherland. And he was referring to Britain, and it was just really bizarre, but the whole conversation left us feeling just really uneasy. The next night, my partner is hospitalized because of the pain. We check out of the hospital after a few hours because the test came back clear. Note too that bad medicine can also affect your physical health, mental health, and it comes in different forms. The very next night, though, we're laying in bed and my partner says she feels weird, like something is around. I reassured her everything was okay, and we're laying there, and she says, "Babe, did my clothes or a blanket fall off the bed?" And I said, "What? No, I'm laying near the edge." She's like, "Please check." I turn on the light and she screams and just starts crying. She said that she saw something black slide off the bed. And man, did I get shivers up my spine. I ran to our medicine shelf to get our medicine and I start smudging and praying at this point. I smudge our whole house and after that, things have calmed down. No more disturbance for the rest of the night anyway. It's been a little while now since anything has bothered us, but this is my first time sharing and piecing things together. I'm going to be seeing a traditional healer next week to have her cleanse us on our journey. I have a scar from the scratch that I woke up with the other night too, and the whole situation is just really weird. Oh, and about the bad medicine too. From what I remember, it was thrown on us because of jealousy or a dispute over land or something. I've heard with bad medicine that it can be removed from you though, through prayer and traditional healers, and hence why we're heading there soon. This happened a few years back, but it's still one of the oddest experiences that I've ever had. I still think about it from time to time, and it's pretty chilling. So, I was living in a house with 4 of my best friends. The house is laid out so that when you enter the front door, you walk down a short hallway that faces the communal bathroom, where the hallway tees off to the kitchen or living room on the left and all the bedrooms to the right. Each stretch of the hall from the bathroom to the next room is roughly about 8 to 10 feet, I'd say. I just got off work too and came in through the front door, and as I walked down the initial hallway, saw my roommate, Jeff, standing at the sink and staring into the mirror. Thinking nothing of it, I said, "Hey Jeff," as I rounded the corner to the right to head to my room. After a beat or so and a few steps more, I hear, "Huh? Oh, hey dude." And I turned to see him, and the odd thing was, Jeff was poking his head around the corner that led into the kitchen. I was puzzled because there was no way in those few steps that I had taken with my back to the bathroom that Jeff could have made it down the hall and around the corner, unless he had literally ran full speed down there. I looked back at the bathroom and to him and asked, "Were you just in the bathroom?" And he said no. As I let it sink in a bit, more in my confusion, I realized how odd the expression Jeff had in the bathroom. Just blank and really eerie. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened. To further the discussion and the eeriness too, Jeff and I later had somewhat of a falling out. He seemed to almost become a different person, in fact, changing from a polite, kind person to a very angry and bitter one. At the time, we thought that some distasteful people at his job were beginning to influence his lifestyle and behavior, him being a pretty impressionable follower. But now, I wonder if this phenomena didn't have some kind of an effect. Anyone have any thoughts or know more about doppelgangers? I sure would appreciate some insight. Thanks. This happened when I was 16. My stepdad has his uncle who, for as long as I can remember, I've just gotten really bad vibes from. It's hard to explain why, too. It's kind of mostly just been instinctual. He's always just tried being playful toward all the little girls in our family, like tickling them and such, and I was always creeped out by it and have kept my interactions with him to the bare minimum ever since I was like 8, I'd say. Anyway, one day during the summer, I was sitting at my kitchen table with 2 other girlfriends, and Mr. Creepy Uncle just walks right into my house. It wasn't abnormal for people to come and go as they pleased at my house during that time, but he was not someone who had ever just swung by and walked in before. He looks at my friends and me and asks, "Are your parents home?" And I say no. Then he asks if we want some candy, and I say nothing, but one of my friends, sweet summer child, says, "Yeah, I'd love some candy." He says, "Okay, but you have to come into my van to get it." Both me and my other friend basically say, "Hell no," And then he's like, "Are you sure? It's really good candy." We obviously refuse, and after more probing, he basically is just like, "Okay, your loss." I told my mum, and at the time she didn't have a huge deal about it. Probably because he's an idiot for thinking he could lure 3 16-year-old girls into his van with candy. But she is someone who has admitted to getting bad vibes from him too. But now that I'm an adult and have talked to her more about it, she's told me that that's basically the consensus in our family too. All of the women are creeped out by him, and absolutely no one trusts him alone with their kids. She's also told me that he definitely has a record and has spent time in prison, but no one in the family will talk about why. I think maybe they're trying to protect him because he's just a lonely old bachelor and they figure that he's harmless. But what would he have done if we'd gotten in that van that day? I do not want to find out. So my sister has a poltergeist that we all call George. It's questionable if he's actually a poltergeist or just a spirit or something else, who knows, but he's been around for at least 10 years now. Anyway, here's the stuff that you'll actually care about. So, like I said, his name is George, and he kind of appeared when we built our new house. I assume, due to family issues that created a negative enough energy, he was created or was able to feed off of it enough to become more steady. I was the first one to notice him too. It started with the house creaking, lights flickering in my room, and glasses in the kitchen tinkering together at night. It's just the house settling, is what I told myself at first. It's just weird electrical issues, my dad told me. It's just your imagination, my mum told me. Yeah, okay, whatever. But then I started hearing actual footsteps at night, and cars' door slamming outside at weird hours. It's just the house settling. It's people going to the bathroom or getting water. It's just the neighbours and the way the sound carries over the forest and fields. Again, bullcrap, but that's what I told myself. A few other experiences happened, not surrounding George, and slowly over time, more of my family started believing me. In fact, it kind of became a bit of a joke of sorts. Like, "Hey, where's my tape measure? I left it on the bar. George probably took it." And so, whenever we lost something and found it in a weird place, it was George. But there was one time that he took a biscuit, which I guess could have been a child, but it's more fun to blame the ghost, so, like I said, it became a running joke. But then, it started getting more violent. For instance, if Dad was in a pissy mood, something would usually come flying at his head. Some of the more notable occurrences happened in the kitchen too, when we would be cooking. Pots and pans and cookie sheets have all come out of their assigned areas and smacked him in the head, which obviously makes him more angry, but he usually leaves the house for a bit when that happens. We always blame George, but he just blames whoever put the dishes up there for not putting them up correctly. Doors started slamming. It's just the air conditioner was the excuse, and furniture started moving around, just the dogs pushing stuff when they're not home, and glasses started shattering just for no reason, just chip-thin glass, it happens. And while the parents brush it off as just normal occurrences and don't really think George is real, the kids, they know. And then came the big thing. So all the kids were in bed, but their closet light was on one night. We were all arguing on who was going to go and turn it off because nobody wanted to get up. And then we see a pale arm come out of the closet and flick the light switch off. Needless to say, we didn't sleep that night. For the longest time, I thought that he was attached to me because stuff always happened around me and I saw it the most. But after I moved out, I guess he attached himself to my little sister or something. So things have happened at both parents' houses, like the stuff I described. And some mild stuff at my mum's house too. House creaks, knocking, doorknobs rattling, windows banging, glasses breaking, weird electrical things and objects getting moved around. Always my sister's things too, and never my mum's, which is weird. My mum actually refuses to believe George is real, despite being present for many of the occurrences too. Over the years, George has become kind of a part of my sister's daily routine, in fact. She communicates with him pretty regularly, usually by knocks on the wall. She leaves some food on her plate when she gets done to kind of offer it to him. She has a small area in her room that she leaves open and clean for him. When he gets loud at night, she tells him to be quiet, and he listens. In fact, she rather enjoys his company most of the time. She says that she doesn't feel so alone. Now, I have no idea why we started calling him George, but that's just what he's always been to us. The pets that we have don't really react to him. They seem to be pretty chill with him. And yes, we've definitely had other experiences too, but we know George's patterns and the way he feels when he's doing things. Interestingly too, he only ever gets violent around people who are angry individuals, and seems to be more calm when around calmer individuals, and my sister. When I was about 4, my parents and I moved into a new house in a really awesome neighborhood. Everything was going pretty great, and then one night, my dad woke up to heavy knocking on our front door at 3 a.m. He went to see what was going on, and there were multiple police cars and a bunch of policemen standing around our house. My dad opened the door and asked the officers what was wrong. One of them said, "Sir, I need you to bring your wife and child, if you have one, downstairs. Then I need you to step outside with these officers here." My dad has no idea what in the world was happening, but he went upstairs and woke up my mum and I. When he brought us down, the officers sat my mum and me on the couch and started asking super weird questions. It was all stuff like, does your husband ever hurt you? Has he ever made you feel helpless? Have you ever gone in your basement to get away from him? Does he ever lay hands on you or your child? All stuff like that. My mum was obviously shocked and, of course, said no to all of it. My dad would never do anything like that. Then, policemen with flashlights and guns came in and asked to search our house. We said yes because we were honestly freaked out at this point and no one was telling us what was going on. They walked all around our house and then asked to see our basement. Now, our basement is not finished, but it was very large and super creepy. I hated it so much at the time too. No one ever goes down there and we just keep it locked. My dad unlocked it and they searched it and were calling out stuff like, "We're here to help, please come out." They couldn't find anything of interest, so they came back upstairs. My dad then told them that we deserved to know what was going on. One of them said, "Nothing seems to be the matter here, so I guess it's fine to tell you. We received a call from a woman who was hysterical. She was screaming and crying, saying that her husband was going to kill her. She had barricaded herself in a basement to get away from him." My dad was obviously spooked and said, "Well, why would you come to our house?" And the officer said, "We traced the call to your house." And that is why I hate my basement so much more than I already did. Our neighborhood is very old, and so is our house, so maybe it was a ghost or something. We still don't know what happened that night, neither do the police, but I do know that sometimes weird stuff happens in my basement. It has a door to the outside that we keep locked, but I've been outside and seen it swing open at one stage. We even use deadbolts and stuff too. So anyway, we still don't know what happened, but it was weird. This happened when I was a small child, probably around 4, and it was an experience that I know now as a near-death experience. So I was with my grandmother, who was very healthy, still is very healthy for a 70-year-old woman. We went trekking across our property with a picnic basket in tow, just looking to sit down with our dog and have a nice time, normal grandparent stuff. We ended up crossing the creek, it was dry at the time, to go back to the pasture. Nearby, probably 50 yards away, was our cedar tree. We had sat down and started eating when our dog just started acting crazy. This dog, bless her soul, was an angel too. Honestly, did not act like a dog most of the time. She never barked, never jumped, always acted polite, but at this stage, she just went nuts, running in circles around us, growling and barking. My grandmother got concerned, obviously, so she put our picnic stuff in the basket and tried to calm her down. I was sitting a few feet away, scared because my dog was growling. I'll admit, too, that my memory gets a little bit fuzzy around here, but I remember seeing a large grey creature step out of the creek or the tree line that we had previously walked through. My grandma scooped me up and just booked it out of there, our dog running with us. I am 90% sure, too, that she ran to the cedar tree, and she always talked about it being her favourite tree and about how protective it was or something. The tree was a lot closer than our house, and that was roughly half a mile away at this point. I just remember our dog calmed down eventually, and I was happier. And no, I don't live in the southwest. I live in the south central and eastern Arkansas, close to Louisiana, so I honestly have no idea what it could be. So I was 15 years old, and there was some stuff that I was going through. My parents were recently divorced, depression problems, but nothing truly awful, I guess. It was late. I was dealing with some pretty bad insomnia too. I was texting my best friend, who I don't talk to much anymore, partially because of this, I think, too. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I remember looking over at the corner of my room and just seeing a tall shadow there, about 6 to 7 feet tall. I freeze, obviously, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, shadow, tree shadow? There's a tree outside, there must be. I slowly turn my head to look out the window, and there's no way the tree can be casting this shadow. There's just too much wind. I look back over at it, and it's still a very still shadow. I text my friend, Lynn, there's something in my room and I'm very scared. I'm getting really bad feelings from it. And directly after I send the text, the shadow just dissipates. Like, kinda just fades away, as does the feeling of dread too. Lynn texts me back, and there's something here too, a really tall shadow in the corner of my room, and I'm freaking out. Her bedroom had no window, so there's no way that she could mistake it for a tree shadow. And a few minutes after I get the text, I feel that sense of dread returning. There is the shadow again, standing at the foot of my bed this time. It was way too dark to get a photo, and I honestly was not thinking about pictures at that time. I was completely terrified. My breathing gets super labored, and I feel a panic attack coming on, when all of a sudden, my phone battery drops from 80-ish to 0 and dies. Panic attack comes on strong at this point, and I jump for my phone charger next to my bed. I plug my phone in, looking for the shadow that I took my eyes off of for maybe a second, but it's gone. The phone comes back on and jumps right back up to where it was before it died. I keep it plugged in just in case. And I text Lynn, I think it killed my phone battery. What the hell, I'm scared. About 10 minutes later, she replies, it was standing next to my bed. It was all black and I'm scared. It killed my phone battery too, but it's fine now. It's gone again though. So, I start putting it together. There's a few minutes between jumps. It seems to be following the text or something. I start texting anyone and everyone that I can, just random bullcrap. How are you? Been a while? Are you okay? Etc. Maybe I can confuse it or stretch it out or something. But holy smokes, that was a terrible idea. My bed instantly starts shaking violently. My headboard is banging the wall and my blankets get ripped straight off the bed. I can see it standing tall at the foot of my bed, and I have a fight or flight reaction at this point, and jump off my bed towards my bedroom door and the light switch. As I'm leaping over to the door, I feel a really cold hand touch my ankle, almost pulling me back towards my bed. I yank open my door and turn my light on at the same time, and it flickers for a moment, temporarily blinding me, and the bulb just shatters everywhere. I scream and I run across the hall to my mum's room where I start sobbing. And she has the audacity to just laugh at me. I'm freaking out, scared of this demon monster shadow thing in my room that blew my light bulb, and she laughs at me. I get angry and I tell her that I'm not sleeping in there tonight unless I get a new bulb. She promises to buy me a new bulb the next day and gives me the mag light and tells me to sleep in the living room. So I creep into my bedroom to grab my phone charger and just run to the living room and turn the lights all on. After a few days, I start sleeping in my bedroom again, but I had to get a new bulb and sleep with the flashlight for a long time after that. So yeah, Lynn refuses to talk about it. Nobody else experienced it, and nobody ever believes me. It's horrible too, but I still can't walk to my bed in the dark without feeling that hand on my ankle. This happened about 2 years ago after going to see a movie with a group of my friends. So I live in a small town. The nearest decent movie theatre is about 40 minutes away, I think. I'm always the driver because my car is the most functional for those long distances, and I'm also kind of a softie when it comes to doing favours for others. This also means that I'm always the last one to get home for the night, and it's usually very early in the morning when I finally do get home. So this specific night, it was pretty late when we got back. Like I said, it's a small town, so when it gets late, the roads are pretty much dead. There's an order that I drop everyone off in, the furthest from my house to the closest, logically. We're pretty spread out, though, from each other. If you've ever been to a rural town, then you'll know that there's a lot of twists and turns on back roads like that. But I dropped off one of my said friends, and there was only my boyfriend left. I drove towards my boyfriend's house and stopped at a T intersection along the way. The road in front of us was lit with streetlights, but the further you looked down either side of the road, it was dark. There were no cars anywhere, as I expected, so I turned onto the road and headed towards my boyfriend's house. Not even a minute down the road, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. I don't know when they'd shown up, but I remember noticing them because the headlights looked like the ones in a friend's car. But there were 4 lights all around, and arranged like the corners of a trapezoid. For a moment, too, I thought it could be my friend, because the lights were so distinct, but the vehicle looked a bit larger, and I just brushed it off and continued driving. We were on one of the main roads, so it didn't surprise me when they continued to follow behind us as we went. After a little while, I turned onto a back road that was pretty hilly, but it was the shortest way to my boyfriend's house. And the vehicle turned onto that road as well. It still wasn't that weird. I mean, my boyfriend lives on one of an assortment of ranch houses, so we've had a lot of people follow behind us to that section of the town and then eventually taper off in their separate driveways. They were pretty far behind us as well, so again, I just didn't think much of it. Sure enough, though, they just kept taking every turn that we took. The closer we got, too, my boyfriend and I even began to joke about how long they'd been behind us. And it was only when we turned into his driveway that we finally grew concerned. Now, he has a long driveway that goes up a hill. I reached the top and could see the vehicle slowing down at the end of his driveway, and then it turned in and began to slowly drive up. Very slowly, too. My boyfriend and I sat in my car looking at each other, because we didn't know what the hell was going on. As it got closer, though, we went through every possible person that it could have been. We even considered my sister, who could have recognized my car and wanted to scare us. It was a reach, since no one we brought up owns a car that looks like that, but I was praying that that was the answer. They reached the top and parked maybe 10 feet behind me, and then they turned off their headlights and just sat there. It was too dark to be able to make out what kind of car it was. I kept turning in my seat trying to see if someone was walking around or if I could catch a glimpse at their vehicle. We sat there for a long time too, trying to figure out what the hell was happening. We didn't dare step out of the car, and I kept the engine running in case I needed to make a break for it, although they were parked directly behind me, blocking the driveway. I'm not sure how long we sat there for, but there was a good while that just nothing happened. And then I heard a creaky door open and shut. I instinctively pressed the lock button on my door, even though my car was already locked, and I watched as a middle-aged or older man came into view on my side mirror. As I watched him step closer, I leaned away from the window towards my boyfriend in the passenger seat, and the man walked up to my window. He had a pretty big gut, and his silver hair was pulled into a ponytail underneath a red cap. He cupped his hands and peered into my car, and I still remember him looking right at me so vividly. His expression was blank, and I couldn't even move. Then he stood up, he pointed back towards his vehicle, said something that I couldn't hear, and then just turned around and left. He didn't turn his headlights back on until he reached the road, and when he turned, I could see the dark outline of a truck bed. My boyfriend and I sat there stunned for a long time. My boyfriend and his stepdad drove behind me to my house to make sure no one followed me there either. He hugged me before I went inside and said that he'd give me an update the next day. No one really could explain it or knew who he was. I haven't seen a similar truck since then, but if I notice a car that's been following me for a while, no matter what it looks like, I make sure to take an extra few turns away from my house until they've turned on a different road these days. I really can't help the sneaking suspicion, too, that things may have gone a lot differently if my boyfriend wasn't in the car with me. So I'm 19 and have lived in several different houses in my lifetime, but there were two places that I lived where you could tell that something was just very clearly wrong. One was a trailer, where I had a few encounters involving doorknobs forcefully jostling and hearing strange noises. I was also plagued by nightmares and hallucinations, but I'm going to be talking about the worst house that I've lived in. The one that still fills me with anxiety thinking about it, even after I haven't lived there in like 5 years. This is the only time that I've ever seen the full manifestation of a spirit, or whatever you call them, and I hope that it's the last time too. So we moved into this 2-story house when I was 9 years old. Ever since arriving, I could already feel that something just wasn't completely right. But while the trailer was filled with a very heavy, tumultuous energy, this house was just the complete opposite. It was just bleak and still. It was an unnerving quiet, and any room that I walked in made me anxious to escape, though the bottom floor was definitely far worse. I spent most of my time in my room on the second floor at the end of the hall, and I only felt safe downstairs when it was daylight. And even then, I was nervous if I was completely alone on the first floor. While living in this house, I slowly devolved into one of the worst depressive states that I've ever been in at age 12. I stopped caring about school, my health, sleep, pretty much everything in fact. I would frequently find myself waiting until the night before to write essays. Our family computer was downstairs in the dining room. My parents' room was right beside the staircase, so I wasn't able to turn on any lights as I snuck down. I just used the flashlight on my phone. I can remember being paralyzed with fear descending those stairs into the dark first floor, but I couldn't run out of fear that I'd be caught by my parents. I completed my papers as fast as I could, with only the light of my computer to see in the dining room, and I just remember feeling like I was going to die down there sometimes. I would also hear the occasional noise, and I would whip around to figure out if it was my parents or something else, and it was never my parents. I don't really know why I kept procrastinating schoolwork just to end up forcing my body through such extreme anxiety. I just wasn't in a good place, that's for sure. Somehow, though, it was harder to get back up the stairs than it was writing an entire paper downstairs. I really don't know what was so different about the landing of the staircase, but I absolutely hated crossing that threshold. In fact, I would walk upstairs backwards with my phone flashlight pointed down the stairs, so agonizingly slow that I'm surprised I managed to cling the threads of my sanity that I had. And I'm really not sure how old I was when I saw the apparition of the house. It was when I didn't have school though, so I was allowed to stay up at this point. I was downstairs with my sister playing video games until it was around midnight. We had all the lights on. My sister said something about going to her room, and for some reason I thought that she was going to come back downstairs. I played alone for a while before I realized that she must have left me alone. I was hit with that familiar anxiety, and I decided that it was just time to go upstairs. Now, let me describe the layout of our first floor. There weren't any doors down there, only openings in each wall, so you could walk in a circle around the staircase, which was in the middle. The living room was the biggest room, and had an open floor where you could see the landing of the staircase across the room. On the other side of the staircase was a den that you could also walk through to go upstairs. The kitchen and the dining room were connected to each other and separated from the staircase. There were multiple light switches too for each room, so before going upstairs, I would usually start at the den and circle around the kitchen and dining room to the living room, turning off each light. Then I would turn off the last light and just make a mad dash through the living room for the stairs. This night wasn't that much different too. I was trying not to make myself scared, because I honestly just wanted to go upstairs and go to my room. So I did things as casually as I could. I started in the den, turned off the light, then the kitchen, then the dining room, then the living room, and walked around in a circle. Only this time, when I turned off the living room light and looked ahead, I swear to you that I saw a woman. There was a faint light coming from a Coors decal that my stepdad had hung up at the top of the stairs, and she just looked so solid and real. The light created shadows on her face, and there she was, just standing on the landing of the staircase, in what looked like a nightgown, I think. The Coors sign made her skin look blue. She had short, shaggy black hair, but her face wasn't obscured. I could see her eyes, but they were heavily sunken, though the dim light probably didn't help. Her nose was thin and upturned, but I'll never forget her smile. It wasn't a big toothy grin with bloody fangs or anything. She just had a slight upturn to her lips. But I couldn't tell if it was smug or kind. The thing I remember most, though, was that I could see the space that she occupied. I could see her standing behind the railing of the stairs, and I could see her swaying slightly in her place. I was completely frozen in the doorway, obviously, in between the dining room and the living room. My hand hadn't even left the light switch before I saw her. I was afraid to make even the smallest movement. It felt like it all happened within an instant, too. I was terrified of what was about to happen to me if I looked away even for a moment. And somehow I mustered the bravery to move my finger and flip the living room light back on. And at that moment, she disappeared with the darkness. I can remember continuing to stare at that spot that she had been in, looking for some sort of shape that I could have imagined was her. I was just cemented to my spot. While at the light switch, I turned the dining room light back on, and feeling a little safer now, glanced at the clock. And apparently, I had been standing there for a full 30 minutes. I absolutely panicked, and I turned all of the downstairs lights on, even the laundry room. But the whole time I knew that I would have to turn them all off again, and I would have to go back upstairs. That's where I knew that I would be safe. I knew I had to go there, but to do that, I would have to pass through the landing where the woman had just been standing. Just thinking about it absolutely terrified me too. I spent nearly an hour just pacing downstairs, going back and forth between the living room and the den to glance at the staircase. I kept wondering if there was another way that I could get back up the stairs, but there just wasn't. I finally just said screw it though, and decided to push through. I wasn't going to spend all night trapped down there with her, malevolent spirit or not. I did the same as before, turning off each light in a circle before stopping at the living room. I took a deep breath before turning off the living room light, and she wasn't there. I made a run for it, thinking to myself, just get through it, just get to the top and get through it. The landing was absolutely freezing too, and as I got closer, I felt like something was reaching straight through me and trying to steal the life from me or something. I latched onto the rail and swung myself around and onto the stairs with such urgency, I'm surprised that I didn't fall on my face. I clambered onto the stairs and crawled on my hands and feet as fast as I could. I didn't care who I woke up at this point. I needed to escape. I got to the top faster than I thought I could, and sprinted to my room and just slammed the door, and locked it too, for ghost precaution, I suppose. I laid in my bed, trying not to picture her in my room, but she was behind my eyelids every time that I tried to go to sleep. I moved out of that house when I was 14 and into the trailer. There was a different kind of haunting experience there, but nothing will terrify me as much as that house. Anytime that I begin to question my beliefs, I remember this moment too, and I trust myself and my experiences, and I know what I saw that night was absolutely real. It was such a powerful encounter, and it immediately erased any doubts that I have regarding the existence of spirits. And to be quite honest, I don't think that I'll ever forget her. So I have a friend who has just recently been getting into these entitled parent stories on Reddit. We eventually started talking about them and would laugh at the sheer stupidity of Darwin's failed experiments. Until last week, that is. She began to be more and more quiet, and Eventually, I finally pressed her, and she revealed that she's been coming across some of the stories of attempting kidnappings, and they reminded her of a night years ago. After telling me what happened, too, we're both still not sure if this is the right place for it, but it's a story that if someone would ever find themselves in a similar situation, they may get some ideas to protect themselves. So anyway, many moons ago in the early 2000s, my friend Sarah was going to the local state college. Now, while the college was in the city, she lived out in the country with her father and would use the bus system to go to and from school. One afternoon after class, her and her friends went to one of their apartments to study for some exams. And well, being the young and responsible young adults that they were, studied for maybe 10 minutes tops before things turned to a more festive gathering. After a few hours, though, Sarah happened to glance at the clock, which caused her mind to snap. Hey, what time does the last bus run? Screaming profanities and prayers warding off her demise by her father, she quickly ran to the bus stop just in time to catch its final trip of the night. But with a huge sigh of relief, she flopped down in a seat in the back and threw her headphones on. Lost in thoughts of what elaborate tales to tell her father, she hadn't noticed a little boy walking up to her until she noticed movement out of the corner of her eye as he sat down beside her. She somehow managed not to recoil at the sight of the child because, while the child was completely filthy and reminded her of someone from Deliverance, it was his creepy smile that she remembered most. He just sat there too, smiling at her until she slowly slid her headphones down and the following began. Hello? Hi. Hello. You're pretty. Well, thank you. What's your name? Now, Sarah had this policy of never giving any personal info to strangers, but kids were usually harmless in her opinion. But every alarm was going off in her head, so she said, my name's Katie. That's a nice name. Well, I like it. And then the kid just sat there, smiling at her. After like a few minutes of smiling, the kid finally said, You would make a great mum, you know. And hopped down and walked back to an even more dirty and unkempt monster of a man, whom she could only assume was the boy's father, because just like his son, he was just smiling at her. When she looked at him, he nodded politely and just kept smiling too. She put her headphones back on and dug out a book to pretend to study, but she kept looking back and noticed both of them just smiling right at her. As each stop came up and went, she prayed that they would get off, but as the bus began to empty of other passengers, she soon found out that it was just her, some middle-aged woman, and those two. The bus was beginning to slow now for its next stop in a small town that had a series of restaurants. She couldn't take them anymore too, and decided that it was safer for her to go to the McDonald's and wait for her father there than sit on the bus any longer. So she gathered her things and prepared to disembark. As she followed the woman to pass, she noticed the man was gathering their things as well. And she thought, hell no. But she didn't want to make it out like she was trying to avoid them, so she moved to the seat near the front and sat back down. To her horror, she watched as the man and his son took another seat and sat back down too, still smiling at her and nodding. Her anxiety was through the roof at this point as she watched more stops come and go until her stop was coming up. I mean, what was she going to do? Her mind was racing, but as the bus came to a stop, she gathered her things again and watched in horror as the men gathered their things as well, and instead of getting off, she sat back down again behind the driver this time. Excuse me, how much further until the end of the line? 3 more stops. Sarah then leaned in and told the driver about the man and her son, and asked if it was possible to have the police there when they arrived. The driver looked in the mirror, and then told her that he'd take care of it. Sarah glanced back, and her heart jumped into her throat as, while the little boy was still smiling at her, the father wasn't anymore. She described it as a look a parent gives their child when they've done something wrong, and a wait till we get home kind of thing. Now, Sarah was usually a very strong individual, but she was in tears at this point as she took out her phone and tried to call her father, and there was only voicemail. Who else could she call? Well, she finally decided to call her ex. He may have been a disloyal piece of crap, but she could always rely on him when it counted most. As quietly as she could, she poured her heart out about what was happening and asked if he could meet them at the last stop. "I'm at Rogers right now, and it's about 20 minutes to get there, but I'll get there as fast as I can, alright? Please, hurry, okay?" she begged. Finally, they came over the hill to where the final stop was. Frantically, she looked for something, anything that could help her, but there was nothing. Finally, the bus pulled in and the door swung open. The man glared down at her, waiting for her to get off first. "Hold up, miss. I need to talk to you about your bus pass." The man stood there for a moment until the driver told him that this was the last stop and he needed to get off. "I'm waiting for my..." "Sir, you need to get off. If you're waiting for her, she'll be along shortly, but I need you to get off now, alright?" Angrily, the man stomped off with his child in tow. As soon as they got off, the driver shut the door too. "What the..." The man began yelling and banging on the door, and Sarah was scared that he was going to break the glass, until she noticed 2 police cars pulling in, followed shortly by the little piece of crap Jack drove. The police ordered the man away, and she couldn't hear what was being said, but Jack later revealed that the man was claiming that Sarah was his daughter and he was taking her home. Once Jack asked him her name and he said Katie, that was all she wrote. In the end, the man got into a fight with Jack and the officers, but was finally arrested. When she got home and told her father what happened, he tossed her the keys to his old 82 Ram, and she was never to ride the bus again. And while it was loud and a bit of a pain to drive, she never felt safer. But she did ride the bus one final time after that, when she delivered a plate of cookies to the driver who clearly saved her life. About a year ago, I was working at a local credit union as a call center rep. Basically, my job was to answer phone calls that came from the outside and either perform a banking service over the phone after asking a series of identifying questions, or direct the calls to where they needed to go. I wasn't really fond of the job, as it came to be incredibly tedious, and more often than you would think, there were definitely creepers on the other line looking to entertain themselves, if you know what I mean. But I'll tell you just for context too, that though being a call center rep sounds easy, it's not usually, especially when working for a financial institution. You're expected to identify a person in very particular manners over the phone perfectly each time, and you take about 80 to 100 calls a day. You're expected to pretty much know every answer possible with little to no help from management or other departments, even if the questions asked had nothing to do with the call center department's skill set. Often, too, you'll handle requests from members that can potentially put accounts at risk, so you need to be diligent and on your toes on every single call. It's also important, too, that I note that at the call center I worked at, it was not accessible to the public, ever. We had to swipe special badges to get in and out of the building, and there were multiple door points that you had to enter or leave the building through. But anyway, one particular winter day, I had been scheduled 11 a.m. to 7:45 p.m. It was a long and grueling shift, especially because most phone calls came in between those hours. The lucky ones would have left for the day at about 4:30 p.m., just when the calls were beginning to pick up. I had made it through all of my shift with little to no issues, other than the usual nonsensical calls, save for some incredibly stressful wire transfers that I had to make over the phone. 7:25 p.m. rolled around just as scheduled, and I was getting ready to place myself in the research auxiliary to signal that I was done with my calls for the evening when my phone rang. Rolling my eyes, I picked up the call hesitantly, and as soon as I hit the green answer button, I remember feeling my stomach drop with regret, like I should have just let it go to the answering service or something. On the other end, I was immediately met with the sound of heavy breathing. I remember hearing my pre-recorded greeting play over my headset. "Hello, thank you for calling the contact center. This is Britt. With whom do I have the pleasure of speaking with today?" And as soon as my recorded greeting ended, I was hit with rapid-fire questions by a man. At first, they were normal run-of-the-mill banking questions. How much is in my checking account? Did this bill come out of the account today? Is my payroll scheduled to come into my account on Friday? I answer all of his simple questions as quickly and politely as possible. But then the questions just got weird. Like, what is the interest rate on my checking account? If you know anything about finance, you know that the interest you accrue on your checking is pretty much slim to none. Pennies a month, if that. So, it definitely was not a question that I was ever asked, even after working there full-time for a year at this point. Taken aback by the question, though, I gave him the answer. There was a long pause, and the next questions he asked still haunt me to this day because I have no idea why he would possibly need to know these things. What is the temperature right now? Outside, I asked. No, of the room you're in right now. To which I respond, I'm not sure. Standard room temperature? He made an annoyed sound and then asked another invasive question. Where are you located? Are you located on... And he named the correct road the call center was actually on. And at this point, I was definitely feeling a little bit freaked out. I'm a paranoid person in general, but these questions, they just didn't feel right. I tried to convince myself that he could just be maybe multitasking or even under the influence or something. My paranoid self tried to professionally throw him off the trail that I suspected that he could be on. Yeah, that's where the call center is located, but it's not accessible to the public. If you'd like, I can direct you to the closest branch to you based on your address. He ignored me and asked me this last question. What time do you employees leave the building you're in? I replied, we stopped taking calls around 7:30 p.m., but I can't actually tell you what time the employees leave. Sorry. He ignored my answer and began asking descriptive questions rapid fire, like, how tall are you? How old are you? What's your last name? Startled, I began to say that I couldn't list that information for security purposes, but before I could get my last word out, he just disconnected the call. I remember shutting down my system and telling my cubicle neighbor about the conversation and just explaining that it felt off. Unfortunately, my coworker dismissed what I had to say as just another loony member of the bank, and we giggled a little bit about it, but I was still panicked and had trouble catching my breath. As typically we are required to stay another 15 minutes to help managers close shop if necessary, I used that time to go to the restroom and take a breath as I still didn't feel put at ease. When I went back to my desk to get my things to leave, my parking lot buddy was waiting for me. Luckily, we had a bit of a buddy system in place as it was pretty much pitch black outside and my job had one mere lamppost that barely lit the parking lot. My coworker and I headed for the door. Between the outside of our area that the call center was on, there are 5 sets of secure doors. It sounds excessive, but it's because financial institutions need to be incredibly secure, especially the center point of the bank. The call center was where everything was kept, which was again why the public was not allowed inside. I was just about to swipe my badge through the last set of doors and step outside when one of my supervisors came running behind us and slammed into me. Startled, my coworker asked him what he was doing. He blocked the door with his body, not allowing my coworker or I to leave. With a frantic look in his eyes, he said, "Do not leave. We just received a call from the police that there's a man in tattered clothes walking around the building with a knife looking into the windows. I have them on the line and they'll tell me when it's safe." I don't remember saying anything else but bringing up the call to my coworker and saying that I knew something just didn't feel right. After a solid 45 minutes of waiting for the coast to be clear, the suspect was taken into custody by police. On the way to my car, I walked by the police car that held him, and I could clearly see him through the window as the police car windows weren't tinted. I don't think I'll ever forget the look on his face too, as I passed him because he gave me the creepiest grin. His eyes were just so dead, and it was as if his mouth was trying to make up for the lack of emotion his eyes had. It still gives me chills to this day just thinking about it. The next day, I talked to the manager who had frantically stopped us from leaving the night before, and he told me that the guy had been arrested with the intent of kidnapping. Basically, when the police looked into the guy's background, he had said that the bank that I was working for had repossessed his car and his house and his wife had left him as a result. He was charged with the intent of kidnapping because the cops found questionable items on him when he was arrested. In the trunk of his car were 3 bundles of rope, a box of medical-grade gloves, a hacksaw, and duct tape, which was parked in the back lot of the call center. He was also wielding a 6-inch knife when he was arrested. Reflecting on it a bit, I don't think he was directly intending on coming after me specifically, but it sounds as though he was looking for any call center employee to take hostage, and who knows what else. Immediately after this, I brought the weird phone call to my management, the risk mitigation department, and the security team too. Unfortunately, the call wasn't really taken seriously by my job though. I don't even think they looked into the call. Even though I feel in my gut my phone call and this situation were definitely connected, I wonder a lot about what would have happened if the police hadn't been tipped off about this guy running around the building with all those items in his possession. I still have a lot of unanswered questions, but I'll never forget the bad gut feeling that I got that day. It's important to listen to those, no matter how ridiculous they can seem at the time. This is pretty recent and happened last Friday, and it's still rattling about in my assistant's mind, and I can't blame her. Obviously, I'm still thinking about it as well. We have a client who we set up with one of our more seasoned caregivers, considering it didn't take long to realize that she needs more help than most. This client is an overall sweetheart, really. She's a pianist with a rich history. My favorite story of hers is how she hitched a ride across country to go see Jimi Hendrix live in CA. However, she has the kind of anxiety that's difficult to handle for some. The kind that leads to 4-hour-long calls in a day of panicked sobs and screams because she wasn't sure when she could get the soap. In the past month, she's had the fire and the police department visit her roughly 9 times as well. Not because she fell or was hurt either, but because she needed reassurance. Apartment management was not happy about this, obviously, and this client refuses to even entertain the idea of assisted living. So, sirens it is. Because of this, I and my assistant have been keeping a close watch on the client through the reports our caregiver types up in her documentation at the end of a shift. And we noticed that things seem to be getting worse for the client, mentally. I feared Alzheimer's. One report read of how the client would complain about a blind man living in her apartment with her. She was upset because, well, she had not agreed to share her apartment. I remember thinking that this was the mark of the end. She was just getting worse. Last Friday, my assistant was covering the shift for this client's caregiver since the caregiver was out of town. I was already home on call when I got a call from my assistant. "Hey, sorry to bother you, but I got a question if you have a minute." Sure, go for it," I said. So I'm at the client's house and she buzzed me in, right? But when I got to the apartment and knocked on the door, no one answered. It's locked and totally silent. What do you want me to do? That kicked me in the gut. I was positive that she fell. The few times that I went over there and knocked on the door, she'd have a panic and scream on the other side for me to just hold on a damn second. "Okay, go find the landlord and have them get maintenance to let you in. She might have fell." The main office is empty, but I'll look around for them." "Alright, call me back with an update though. If you don't find them, we're gonna have to call 911 to be safe." My hope was that she just fell back asleep or was so panicked that she couldn't bring herself to the door. Anything but a fall. An hour or so passed when my assistant finally called me back with an update. It was a fall. She was found in her bathroom, pantless and covered in dry, hard feces. My assistant found her in a state of delirium. She didn't know where she was, who she was. The paramedics were called immediately. According to them, judging by the state that she was in and how old the feces were, she'd been down there for a few days. They told my assistant that had the client not been found, she would have been dead the very next day. My assistant offered to clean the mess. Crap was everywhere in the bathroom, but the apartment management had people coming in to take care of it. I couldn't remember the details of that part, but what I can't seem to forget is what my assistant told me that she did next. She was confused. She was wondering how she was buzzed in. To buzz someone in, you need to enter the connected phone and press 0. But there were no phones near the client. She listened to the other line ring for a good 15 to 30 seconds before she was buzzed in. But how? I asked her if management let her up. Sometimes they take pity on us and just ring us in. But no, they weren't in the building. She said they were literally just walking in as I was walking on the elevator on the first floor to find them. She told me she found the phones, though, all three of them, lined up on an end table in the client's living room, next to the client's favorite chair. My guess is that it must have just been a glitch in the tech. My assistant thinks that it was fate pulling strings, a higher power that let her in that day. We've discussed it every day since. My assistant told me that she hasn't stopped thinking about it since it happened, and she's baffled as to how she even got in, even with her beliefs. I don't care for a why anymore in this instant. The client is in recovery, and I accept and I'm grateful for that. And that's the end of this story. She is alive. Have you ever felt like someone was watching you? Or worse, have you ever not expected someone to be a spirit as you've just seen them in plain sight? Well, this story starts basically since I was 11 and lasts through the years till I was about 20 or 21. Of course, not completely consistent, but I think there were multiple spirits, as I believe my apartment was just a catalyst for energy. I lived across from a graveyard, so it was no shock that I saw things when I was still a kid. The first memory I have was when I was 11. Life was okay, but plenty of trauma had happened a couple of years prior, so I was vulnerable and open-minded as I wanted to escape my reality. But little did I know that these people or spirits would not be shy with me at all. Some of them were of being attacked, some where I was being violent or witnessing a murder. I was so young too that I didn't really think of it as just dreams. But anyway, my first memory was when my mum's boyfriend had stayed the night. I was so excited because I felt protected and I didn't want to stay in my room. I was always scared of this particular corner that you turned to face my bed too. I don't know why too, but I just felt like people would peek at me during the night. So this night was great. Like, I was sleeping in the living room and my mum's boyfriend offered to watch TV with me, but he fell asleep as well. And I remember waking up to his obnoxious snoring and I was like, well, crap. It was dark. The hallway was much darker. My living room is right next to my room, but you have to turn the corner to face where I was sleeping. And anyway, I think people could probably have a good idea of what happens next. It was probably about 2 or 3. You know, the usual. I was watching that corner. With all my might, my heart was pounding, and I was trying to face my fear. People tell you to be brave when you're 11 and close your eyes, but for some reason I just couldn't. When all of a sudden, these really pale green fingers start to literally wrap themselves over the corner of the doorframe. I'm honestly getting goosebumps even just thinking about it. It was a hand, but the fingers were just so long. They wrapped the entire doorframe, in fact. And it looked like a baggy cloak-like sleeve, but burlap was attached to it. I don't even know, but then they vanished, and anyway, that was pretty much the end of that encounter, so the next one happened a couple of years later. I remember this night like it was yesterday. It's a chilling one to think about too. I remember having awful dreams and waking up to a scream in the middle of the night. My eyes opened wide as I was stuck in a position, and I was remembering the dream a minute after and then started to get just cold sweats from fear. I had a dream that there was a white humanoid, very terrifying creature crouched in my closet, and it just had the worst smile, like it just had bad intentions. As I was recalling this, like I'm reliving it, I was so paralyzed with fear that all I can remember was just tears. Tears and tears until I could pull the blankets over my head. I fell asleep like that because, well, screw it. But it doesn't end here. I was in high school, having the whole depression thing going on. I was the only gay guy in my whole school, and I wasn't doing so hot. I always had the arts that helped me express emotion, though, and I hadn't had any ghostly things or night terrors going on at this point. One day after school, I remember being so fed up, and I just went into my room. I was being bullied, and I felt so isolated, and I was tearing up, and not sad tears, but tears of frustration, lonely and empty ones. I was kneeling near my closet after I had a good little cry, and all of a sudden I heard a soft woman's voice say, "Are you all right?" It was so light and breathy, and I said yes, but softly, in case someone came in and thought that I was crazy. But I definitely heard a voice come from the closet that day. Now, cut to me being of clubbing age at maybe 20, and I really got into my art and started performing in nightlife. I loved costumes and makeup, so, I became a gay clown, other known as a drag queen. Trust me, this relates. But one night, I was practicing my makeup because I had gigs and competitions. My mum was a great supporter, always wanted to see my work when I was done. I was just putting on eyelashes and saw my mum walk past my room into the living room, but she looked funny. It was just her profile that I could see. She was wearing a white nightgown with that floral lace type pattern on the collar, and it touched the floor. My mum has black hair, and I didn't really think anything of it because I was just feeling myself. I wanted to show her, so I jumped up and started to walk out of my room. I said, "Hey Mum, what do you think?" And before I could finish my sentence, I noticed nobody was in the living room, and it was dark besides one little light. So, obviously, that shook me pretty bad. I'd never felt that shocked before. But maybe my mum just went into her room again really quickly. So I went to check on her and show her, and I expected her to be up since the light was on, but she was asleep in bed. And she had Winnie the Pooh pajamas on. Not a nightgown, too, and I woke her up, though. You better believe that. I said, "Were you just in the living room?" And she, obviously, had been sleeping. I had trouble getting to bed that night. I mean, to see something like that in the flesh, just like a person, walk past my room and I didn't even second guess it. Whatever these things are, they're smart and know when they can and can't show themselves. I haven't seen that lady since, but it was definitely not my mum. And I hope that the apartment was haunted and not me. I lived alone on the 4th floor of an on-campus apartment building when I was in college. Early one morning, around 3 a.m., I was awakened by a knock at my door. I got up, half asleep, and went to the door and peeked out the peephole. And a large guy was standing on the side of my door. I lived in the building for a while and knew my neighbors, but this guy was unfamiliar to me. I didn't open the door, but called out to the guy in the hall. "What do you want? Can I help you?" "Yeah, I need to use your phone," he answered. "It's 3 a.m., I told him. "I know, but my car is broke down outside. I need to use your phone," the guy said. I was still bleary-eyed and foggy-headed, but something just seemed weird about this whole thing, so I refused to open the door. The guy got frustrated, saying that he was in need and I was not being neighborly or something. I still refused to open the door, and he proceeded to call me some choice names. Finally, after repeated refusals to open the door, he left and I just went back to bed. I honestly didn't think much of it until the next day when I was sitting in class going over the whole event in my head. It struck me as just very odd that this guy would choose my apartment to go to and ask for help. After all, I lived on the 4th floor in the middle of the hall. He didn't knock on any of the other doors, just mine. When he left my apartment, he didn't try any of my neighbors. He just left the building. I realized at that moment that he had likely targeted me. If I had lived on the 1st floor near the doors, I might have let it go, but on the 4th? I mean, he had gone up 4 flights of stairs and halfway down the hall just to ask to use my phone? Right. The thought put a cold lump in my stomach, though, especially when I remembered that there was actually a payphone in the lobby of the building. Even now I get chills whenever I think about that night and what might have happened if I had actually opened my door. I actually started doing that too a couple of times because I was a naive moron who always needed to be liked when I was that age. Fortunately for me, my gut instinct won out that night, and I'm here to tell the tale. To preface this story, I've always been wary of this house. A couple of friends and I had actually broken into it before this family bought it and poked around. The stairs leading to the second story are on the far right side of the house, just inside of the front door. They lead to an open loft with a little divider to a smaller sitting area, and a short hallway with a door on the side leading to a bathroom, and then on the back leading to the bedroom on the far side of the house. That bedroom was situated directly over the master bedroom downstairs, which would become his mother's bedroom. In the loft area, just on the other side of the banister, is a small door that leads to the attic. I always got an uneasy feeling around it, even well after they moved in. So, I'll list a few things that led up to this final encounter too. So every night, sometime around 2 or 3, the attic door would open. My friend would often sleep on the sofa in the loft area, and there was a light on just inside the attic door that splashed light across his face, waking him up. When he was in his bedroom, the sound of the door slowly creaking open would often wake him up too, and it was always standing open in the morning too. One day, when he was downstairs in the kitchen, he saw a small white thing that he described as probably 1.5 feet tall, white humanoid in his peripheral vision. When he looked over at it, it ran into the front room by the door. He didn't go looking for it, but his mother would later tell him that his father had seen the exact same thing and ran after it. He threw the couch to the side thinking that it was hidden behind it, but it was gone. There were no other exits in the room too. One day, his mother had a friend over and they played church music and prayed. It turns out that her room had all kinds of crazy stuff happening in it. Noises mostly, but the clothes in the closet would sway back and forth randomly too. That's probably what the praying was about. Because you see, my friend didn't want to tell his parents about what he was seeing, because he assumed that they'd think that he was on drugs or something. His father didn't live with them and confided in his mother much later, but mostly he didn't experience much until well after they'd been living there. The mother didn't tell the others about her problems because she had finally found a good home for her kids and didn't want to scare them. So the praying starts, one assumes as a way to cleanse the house or something, or find some kind of divine protection. I don't really know, but that's what makes sense to me given all the facts. But anyhow, right as they begin praying, the music stops, and loud footsteps stomp across the second story leading to the bedroom, and then the door slams incredibly loudly. The mother's friend left the house, and she called the father from her car, and after that, she was never in the house alone again. Soon after, she had to leave the house, but didn't know her sons were seeing stuff too. She took the younger son with her, but offered to let the older son keep the house for free, and as a 19-year-old, he was like, hell yeah, despite the attic door being weird. Fast forward a year or so, and various things led him to invite a lot of people to stay with him rent-free. Eventually, though, all would leave for different reasons, and one night, he found himself in the house alone again. And sometime around 3 a.m., he would be banging on our door, begging to let him stay with us. That was over 20 years ago, and this is what he told me yesterday about that night. So he was now sleeping in the master bedroom, his mum's old room. He had been experiencing the noises and the swinging clothes, and basically had just tried to ignore it. But that night, he heard the bedroom door open upstairs. Then, loud footsteps moved slowly towards the stairs. At this point, he thought someone might have broken in and was trying to figure out what to do. Whoever it was had stopped at the top of the stairs from what he could tell, so the front door was out. He said that he just considered making a run for the back door, and he heard the stairs start to creak one by one, like someone was walking down them, and he basically froze. His bedroom door was open, so he could see down the hall, but not the stairs themselves, and the next thing he knows, there's a dark, smoky presence in the hallway, mostly formless. It moved towards the room along the wall, momentarily disappearing to the right of the door, and then next, a set of what he described as talons, like from a giant eagle, grasped the doorframe, then a second set below them. Then, a head appears, all smoky but almost white, with pure black where the eyes should be. He said that when it saw him, it visibly frowned and he jumped through the window to get away. I can verify the timing, and that he was indeed very scared. His window was broken out too, and his bushes were all jacked up where he'd pushed through them. But quite frankly, I've never heard of anything like what he said that he saw before. Does anyone have any ideas? This story happened years ago when I was 6 or 7, maybe 8, I think. So my mum and dad went to go visit family for a reunion, I think. It was located at a beachside park and there was a playground nearby. It was a fun day, with swimming and barbecues, but the day was coming to a close. My parents were chatting with the other adults and I went to the playground because, well, I was bored. I didn't think to tell my parents too because I was a dumbass at that age. I assumed they'd seen me, so it was fine, right? As I was playing, a couple approached the playground. They were both Caucasian, with the lady having wavy red hair and some blemishes. She wore a faded overcoat and boots. The man was much taller than her, and he had a bald head, and was wearing a blue tracksuit. They both looked like middle-aged parents in their late 40s or something. I didn't care about them until they walked up to me. They then waved at me and said hi, so I said hi back. I didn't come down from the playset, but then they asked me, "Hey, where are your friends?" Me, being stupid, said that I didn't come with any, and just came with my relatives. I pointed in the direction of the beach. They went far enough that I couldn't see them, probably 100 feet or so away. The couple then tried to make small talk about stuff I liked, where I lived, my home phone number, all red flags that I'd run from today, but I was blind to them back then. But thank whoever's out there too that I didn't remember my home phone or address back then, and only answered questions about the things that I liked. I started coming down the playset too when the lady of the couple asked that question. The question that I'll always remember. "We can be your friends, you know. Don't you want a friend who'll never let you go?" My response wasn't the most normal to the question, and instead of screaming for help, I hopped down the other side of the playset towards my parents and called for them to come over. I believe I called out, "Mama, Papa, look, I made some new friends." Now, for the past 7 or so minutes, I guess, my parents and relatives were looking for me frantically since I'd wandered off. When I called for my parents, my mum heard and started to run over. I'm guessing that she saw the couple. The couple looked at each other for half a second, realized my dumbass was not worth it, and just ran off towards the parking lot. My mum then came to me and gave me a big hug. She then asked what happened, and I told her about the friends that I'd made, what we talked about, and how I was sad that they ran off. My mum just sighed and called the cops, and my mum told them about what happened, and they asked me what the couple looked like. Being a kid at the time, my descriptions were vague and basic. The cops left, and we decided to pack up and then just drive home. On the way home, my mum gave the stranger danger talk to me, and this time I actually listened. I don't know if they were ever caught. I hope they were, for the sake of dumb kids everywhere like me, or that at least this deterred them from nabbing kids ever again, because they were almost caught. I'm really not sure where to start with this because there's just so much that has happened. I'll try and clarify as best as I can without making this too long, but I should first say that I've always been sensitive to these kinds of things, so it's something that's hard to explain without sounding, well, absolutely crazy. I picked up on things sometimes. It's only ever a feeling or a physical response to a place or a person. There is a long history of abuse over many generations in my family's home, and it caused a lot of really horrible experiences, both paranormal and non-paranormal too. It was just a very old-fashioned family that held horrid ideals of how women are treated. I think a part of my past, and maybe the environment, has allowed me to pick up on subtle changes in the air too. But what I mean is that I pick up on the emotional state around me very easy. I could just tell when my father came home because of how heavy and oppressive the house felt. I could tell when I needed to hide or stay outside most of the time because it would feel like the air was full of hot electric pins, maybe, that would just put you on edge. You could tell when he was mad before you even saw or heard him. It was like you're waiting for something to fall and shatter at any second, and nothing good will come of it. There was a lot of death, and not just in the home, but the entire town, so there was no getting away from it until I was much older. So I grew up in an old mining town that didn't become a ghost town after the gold rush. I'm not going to give away too much, but the big mine is still in operation today, but most of all the others are now closed. The part of the town that I lived in was one of the original buildings from when it was first built, a lot of which is in native territories too. There are some homes in my old neighbourhood that are confirmed to be built on old burial grounds, and some that are built before there was a town even. There was also a lot of death from TB, along with all the other stuff. My family is also part of some of the first miners that worked there during its open and who still live in this town. We have had 5 generations in this home until just recently, when it was put on the market by my parents and, hopefully, is never bought. Honestly, I hope the place burns to the ground before anyone else lives there, and I'm horrified at the thought of someone else staying there. If I had the money, I would buy it and keep it empty forever. Like I said, it's hard to start somewhere with just so much going on, so I'll start with the very first memory that I have of anything paranormal when I was 4 years old. I woke up to a woman in my room singing to me like she did every night. She would sing to me in this beautiful language that I had never heard before. Except this was in the morning and it seemed sad and like something was wrong. For some reason, I had this feeling like I had to follow her, and I did. Side note too, all the rooms connect to the open living room or kitchen, as it was heated by the stove and cooled by the root cellar that was connected to the kitchen pantry. It was like a giant rectangle separated from the central point being the kitchen directly in the center left of the building, and the front door being bottom left. So when we reached the kitchen living room, she waved and smiled like she was about to leave. The thing is too is that I thought that she was as real as any normal person. I don't remember her actually saying anything to me in English or Spanish. I was in a multi-language home, and we spoke it often. I just remember that she loved me so much and was always there for me when bad things happened. She was always there to sing me to sleep and was there when I was scared. I was so upset that I started crying and asked her not to leave. I remember to this day the look on her face after 30 years too. She smiled her sad smile and then turned to the door, and instead of walking out of the door, she just walked out the wall where the door used to be before the additional rooms were added on, which I didn't know about until I was in my 20s. I never did see her again, and I never heard her again singing after that too. I still get really sad sometimes thinking about that morning. I don't know where she went, but I hope that I get to see her again someday. My mother found me after a while. I was still crying. I knew that it would be bad to tell her the truth, so I never told her about what happened, and probably never will. But it was after that day when all the really bad things just started to happen, little by little. It was like a small hole that appeared in our home, and slowly things were just leaking through. My uncle became so very sick shortly after this, and died in one of the rooms that I slept in. We switched rooms every few years. I was still young, but I remember him very clearly when he died. It was a very traumatic death and was not peaceful. I don't remember everything from that time, but I remember him coughing up blood and trying to pretend like everything was fine. I just remember that I woke up one morning and Grandma had told me that he had passed in the night and was already with the morticians. After this point, he was seen a lot by family and visitors too. Grandma was heard on more than one occasion crying and telling him to move on and that he was supposed to be in heaven. I remember her telling him, "You'll make the angels cry if you don't move on a regular basis." Maybe a few months after he passed, I moved into his room, and we were very, very poor, so I had no choice but to take the bed that he passed in or sleep on the floor, and that's very bad because of the cold. So the first night I was in there after moving back, I remember not being able to sleep because of the shadow in the room that just wouldn't let me sleep. It wasn't supposed to be there, and was something new that I was really scared about. It wasn't my uncle, and I at some point finally fell asleep, and was woken by me being dropped onto my bed from at least a foot or more. It was enough of a height that I bounced more than once. I opened my eyes and saw this black stuff just all around me. It wasn't like smoke, but moved exactly like it. But it was just black, like the absence of light. I remember jumping from the bed, too scared to do anything but watch it disappear into the center of my mattress. I went and slept with my brother in his cot, and then on the floor in his room when he became too big. I never slept in that room again after that, and from then on I could always feel this evil darkness watching me every time I walked past that room. I could never look into the doorway anymore. It's like when someone is just so oppressive that you can't help but look at the floor and don't dare look them in the eyes. It sometimes felt like it would dare you to look even. Sometimes it threw things and it would rush you and scream things. There were many nights where dishes were thrown from the kitchen and into a room, sometimes mine and sometimes the other kids' rooms. Only Grandma's room and the bathroom had doors, so it soon became a rule that nothing could be left on the countertops, and all cupboards were locked with front door latches, the ones that would hook and latch closed and could not be opened without a bit of effort. The fridge was also locked for some reason. We would wake up to milk or other things being thrown into the living rooms and in the bedrooms. It got so bad, in fact, that Grandma had the priest come over every weekend, up until she was too old and sick and was taken to a nursing facility. When he stopped coming and Grandma passed, it was like a dam burst and everything just went completely crazy. Now, I'm not religious at all, but I feel that that priest was stopping something really bad that now had full control again. There were far more things being broken, vases and cups mostly, and when he stopped coming, it seemed like there was just more traffic, and it surrounded the cellar and the kitchen pantry. This is getting long, and there's still so much more that I haven't even touched on. I'll post later and try to tell one or two more stories at a time. I'll answer as many questions as you guys have in the comment section, and thank you guys for listening. It's hard talking about this because, well, I know that none of it seems real. There was a lot that happened there, and some of it I don't think I'll ever be able to talk about because there's just some things that you can't put into words. Everything sounds fake, even to me, but had there not been so many witnesses in my family, I wouldn't believe it was real and that I was just crazy or was having hallucinations or something like that. I'll stop here for the night, but I'll be back. The building that I used to work in had two security guards, a harmless old guy and a younger guy my age who was not so harmless. Over time, he became friendly, and he asked me on a date. I said yes. I had already mentioned that I was moving out of country soon, so obviously nothing will come of it, but hey, if he wants to come and buy me dinner, why not? Mistake one, though, was giving him my address to pick me up. I mean, he's security at work, and I'm leaving the country soon, so it all seemed like a small risk. I told office mates that I agreed to dinner with him. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? He arrives on time with 24 roses. He then tells me that he's bought a brand new suit and had his car detailed for the occasion. Yeah, it was a bit much, but so far he seems nice and harmless. So I thank him, say that I forgot something, and I'll be right back. I wasn't about to let him in to put the roses in water or anything. But we get to dinner at a very nice restaurant. We've not even had our drink order taken, and he drops this on me. He is a 27-year-old virgin who has never even kissed anyone. This is his first date, and he's super nervous. And I mean, really, dude? You know who else is really nervous now? This chick here. What am I supposed to do with that nugget of info? So, needless to say, dinner was very awkward. I did my best to be polite and kind, but it just got weirder. At the end of the night, he lunged for my face and stuck his tongue in and out of my mouth. I was not expecting that. But hey, he's now kissed a real live girl, and had his first date, so good for him, I suppose. Not looking forward to breaking it to him later that I'm really not interested, and also moving, but why rain on his parade then? But before I could break it to him, it got really weird. Like, how dare you not return my call the next day or the day after? And not that it's his business, but I spent that Saturday and Sunday visiting family. I come home to a full box of voice messages, the last of which was angry. And when I got to work on Monday, I found a lovely letter at my desk. It basically said that he knew where I lived, what car I drove, and some other info showing that he'd been taking notes of my coming and going. Why wasn't I home that weekend and whatnot? Which, obviously, was pretty creepy. And this is why you're single, dude. He got angry and stalkery. I'd see him out on occasion when I wasn't working, and In the end, I just said screw this and gave early notice, and I just got the heck out of there. I wish that I could tell you too that moving country was enough, but no. He somehow found me online. I don't use my real name because of work, but he proceeded to harass me online, followed friends to find me and whatnot, and the dude is acting really aggressive. I hope that I can shake this guy soon, because this seems to be taking a turn for the worse. In 2012, I was just a regular college kid. I'd had a couple of paranormal experiences, but despite this, I had a skeptical attitude toward the paranormal. But then I found out that I was pregnant. My boyfriend and I decided to get married and started looking for a place to live. Amazingly, we found a duplex just a block from my parents' house that allowed dogs and was super cheap. If you've ever watched A Haunting, then you probably know where this is going. But at the time, we were just relieved to find a place that we could afford. The only strange thing was how many people had quickly moved in and out of this particular unit, while the same guy had lived downstairs for over a decade. We had only lived there for a couple of weeks when I asked my husband if he'd moved something of mine. When he said no, I jokingly said, maybe we have a ghost. And my husband froze. I asked him what was wrong, and he said that he hadn't wanted to scare me, but the other night, while we were getting down and dirty, he looked up to see what looked like a man standing in the other room. He said that he'd gotten up to find no one there. I was a little creeped out by this, but since I hadn't seen anything, I told myself that it was all in his head. The next few months were busy with getting ready for the baby, and we didn't notice any activity. In October, our son was born, and we were too busy adjusting to parenthood to think about ghosts. My iPod went missing, but we assumed that it had just been stolen. On Christmas morning, I put the baby on our bed and went to help my husband with breakfast. We heard the baby cry and both rushed back in to check on him. He was an extremely fussy baby who never stopped crying on his own. So we were shocked when he suddenly just stopped crying. We were both standing in the doorway and watched in awe as we saw him interacting with something that we couldn't see. He was looking at something and then started laughing and reaching toward it. We watched this go on for a couple of minutes too. Around this same time, we had to get a new mattress. When we took the old one off, we found my stolen iPod in the middle of the box spring. I still can't think of any explanation for how it even got there. Weird things started happening more often after this too. I became terrified to be home alone, because once, while I was home alone, I was sitting in the living room when a rock was thrown at me. And now, I checked everywhere, but I swear to you that there was nobody there. Once, a ghostly hand reached around the doorframe too. As my son got older, he started to talk about someone named Boo as well. Someone even asked him who he lived with, and he replied, Mama, Daddy, Papa, and Boo. Sometimes I'd even see him try to hand toys to someone that I couldn't see and then get upset when the toys fell to the ground. On one occasion, I was giving him a bath, and he looked up and excitedly exclaimed, Boo, while pointing up. I stood up, trying to see what he was pointing at, only to find nothing but a pocket of cold ice air in the otherwise steamy bathroom. Things would constantly go missing too in that house, only to show up in places that we'd already looked. It drives us crazy and added to our already strained relationship. We started to argue constantly, and my husband became paranoid and accused me of all sorts of things. This house had a basement too, and we kept our washer and dryer down there. It always creeped me out, so I liked to have our dog keep me company when I did the laundry. And one night I was putting clothes in the dryer when I heard my dog growl. I looked up to see him growling at the dark corner of the basement when, all of a sudden, he was knocked backwards and yelps. He gets up and runs, whimpering up the stairs, and I ran after him. My son and I moved out of that house when my husband and I decided to get divorced. Thankfully, we haven't experienced any paranormal activity where we live now. Interestingly, though, after my ex moved out of that house, our relationship just improved a lot. We went from barely speaking to now being friends and successfully co-parenting. I still scratch my head at some of the things that happened in that house, but I'm sure glad that we're no longer living there. G'day mates, it's Busta here. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you would like to help me out, then please go ahead and watch another video by clicking on a card on the screen. As always guys, thanks for all the love and support, and I'll see you mates in the next one.